Every time you complete an aeon, guess what happens? Cataclysm. So guess what happens at the end of the age of Pisces? Read the book of Revelation. What do you see? Cataclysm. Christians tend to be very binary in their thinking.
Yes.
It's black, white, it's on, off, it's good, bad, it's godly or satanic.
Yep.
But almost nothing is that simple. You're going to get the most hostile comments you've ever gotten ever on any of your videos.
Yes.
Let's do it. Let's break the record right now.
Let's do it.
Let's break the record.
I'm in.
The book of Enoch was, at some point in time, expunged from the scriptoriums in Europe and the Middle East. It was exterminated, and this was done intentionally. There's something that's happening like clockwork. Again, that the Zodiac tracks that precipitates cataclysm and ruination on planet Earth. And that's what Cydonia is about. The reason why the Jews rejected the book of Enoch, first Enoch, in their canon, is for the first time I could understand that I had allowed myself to be constricted within this box as a Christian. And I realized that perspective was inadequate. Again, people are going to hate me for it. Flat Earth is, Enoch addresses his manuscript to the generation that will be living at the end of the age in the tribulation. Are you a Leo? Are you a... Yeah. That has nothing to do with the Zodiac. And were Adam and Eve really just naked vegetable gardeners? Or are we missing something? Is there something much more profound here?
All right, we're back with Sir Timothy of Alberino. Man, this is a crazy episode. It meanders through like the first 40 minutes. We were talking about crazy stuff. Really, we're kind of talking about stuff that's fascinating to me, but has nothing to do with anything. So just, if you're like really just want to get into the meat and potatoes of like the book of Enoch and, some of the scripture stuff, you can skip to, there'll be chapter titles and thumbnails on this, but you can skip to about 45 minutes in. If you're like me and you're interested in, little people with red hair, then you can watch the whole beginning of it. And I thought it was awesome. But I think we kind of noticed about 40 minutes in, we're like, what are we talking about? None of us know. Let's talk about the book of Enoch. Per usual, Timothy Alberino's brain is just a work of art and science. And so we try to leverage everything we can when he's in town. Love you guys. Everyone wants to get to the high places, but if you want to go high, you first have to go deep. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Deep End. We're here on a dark, rainy, terrifying day in Nashville, Tennessee with Jake Bryan.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
Super good.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you. I like your hoodie.
We're here with our good friend, Timothy Alberino. Thanks for coming back.
Very happy to be here again. Thanks for having me back.
It's time. Let me explain a little bit about what you're going to experience. Timothy Alberino's brain is complex, riveting. He's a courageous scholar, best-selling author of a book called Birthright. And he goes all over the world in the pursuit of breaking down history and breaking down where we have come through to be where we are today. He loves to talk about Jesus. He loves to talk about aliens, Nephilim. What else do you like to talk about?
All manner of strange things.
All manner of disappearances. You say you're going back to Peru here pretty soon.
Yep. As soon as I get back home to Bozeman, I'm jumping on an airplane and heading to Peru.
Peru's like your second home, it feels like.
Well, it was my home for 10 years, and I love Peru. I love the culture. I love the people. It's the most exotic place for me. I mean, Peru's like the wild, wild west still. You can get into the backcountry of Peru, and it's wild. It's you still have a lot of the native traditions out there. If you get deep into the jungle or up in the Andes, you get into areas where people only speak their native languages, and maybe some broken Spanish. And it's hard to find places like that anymore.
Like fully indigenous, no technology.
Yeah, and I feel very free in Peru, and there's a lot to discover there. And I think it's the most fascinating place on the face of the planet. You have a country where just in terms of the terrain in Peru, the west coast of Peru is one of the driest deserts in the world.
Really? Yeah,
the entire west coast of Peru, especially as you go south, you get into the Atacama Desert, and even around Paracas and Ica, exceedingly dry. Then you start moving into the interior of the country and you get the Andes Mountains, 20,000 foot high peaks. And it's rugged, mountainous terrain. And then on the other side of those mountains is the biggest forest on planet Earth, the Amazon jungle,
Which is
all
lush.
in the same country. I mean, you could literally be in the desert, and in the same day, 24-hour drive in a vehicle, you're in the Amazon jungle, going over the Andes Mountains. So it's just even in terms of the landscape, but if you talk about the strangeness, the high strangeness in Peru, you have megaliths, you have all kinds of strange, the elongated skull culture, the Paracas culture, all kinds of mysterious, the Inca Empire and all of the ruins strewn all over the Andes, and it's just really mysterious place.
Which is like what you love.
Which is what I love.
Yeah. Have you ever done a trek through the Amazon?
Yeah, I've been in the Amazon. I've been in all over the Amazon, the Peruvian side.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been to Brazil. I always stay in Peru, but I've been in. I've primarily right on the Amazon River, the jungle, northeastern Peru. I lived there for a while, up the River Masan specifically. I'm going back up the River Masan next week. And I'll be visiting this family, if they're still there. I'm just going to pop in on them. I'll be visiting this family that I lived with for a while, for an extended period of time. My jungle family.
Oh,
Now the patron of the family, whose real name I think it's Emil. I don't remember. But he was, last time I saw him, I think he was in his 70s. But everybody calls him Paisano. And that's...
Is that a title?
Well, Paisano is like in Italian paisan.
Okay.
It's countryman, and everybody just called him Paisano. So that's what I called him, Paisano. And I lived with him and his family off and on various occasions. And I'm going to go see if they're still there. I'm going to pop in on them and film it.
That's awesome.
So now Paisano is surely dead at this point, because I haven't seen him in 15 years or more. Probably about 15 years. And he was an old man even then. So at this point in time, I expect maybe to find his wife and his sons and his daughter. I don't know if I said this last time, but Paisano had 3 sons and a daughter, and his oldest son, who's a hunter, his name was Grover, named after the Sesame Street character. Then
literally, they watched that.
Then the second oldest son, his name was Mike Tyson.
Seriously?
No, it wasn't like his first name was Mike and his middle name was Tyson. No, his whole name was Mike Tyson.
Oh.
And then the third son's name was Michael Jackson.
Oh my gosh.
And then
hilarious.
The daughter kind of got shafted. Her name is Gina.
Boo.
But
Yeah,
I spent a lot of time with them, and so I'm going to pop in and see if they're still there. Don't know if they're still there or not.
Isn't the Amazon isn't it one of the most dangerous places to be in? You've got like animals, quicksand, piranhas if you get into the river, or is that kind of overtold for Americans?
The jungle, the Amazon, is dangerous because of malaria.
Okay.
And yellow fever. You can also get Uta. Uta's a parasite. It's a parasite that you get from mosquitoes, and if you get Uta, it's these microscopic worms that just eat your flesh. So they like make a hole. Like if you get it on your arm, it'll just make a hole on your arm that doesn't heal. They'll just keep eating away at you. And if you don't get the proper treatment for it, you have to basically amputate that part of your body. Just cut out a big chunk of your arm or whatever. If you get the treatment, it's like a month of very powerful antibiotics. Like intravenous antibiotics. My friend Benny had Uta, and it's quite the ordeal. It's really bad if you get it on your face, because you end up with a big hole in your face.
Oh my gosh!
So,
dude.
And I've known lots of people who've had Uta,
and you can't like inoculate or anything before you go in.
It's a parasite.
Wow.
So that sucks. And then, the real danger in the Amazon, besides malaria, besides mosquitoes. So mosquitoes are the danger. There's 2 other dangers. The other danger would be swimming in the rivers, you have all manner of creatures that want to eat you in those rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not hyperbole. You have, the piranhas are the least of your concerns. You have huge caimans, black caimans, right? Basically alligators, crocodiles, whatever they're kind of in the middle caimans. And usually they're kind of, like an American alligator that size, but they've been known to get really big deep in the Amazon. And then you have the most dangerous thing in the water is the electric eels. Now, they're not going to eat you, but as the electric eels, and they get really big. I killed a big electric eel and got electrocuted doing it. But the really big eels, all of the eels, as they're hunting, they're swimming in the water and they're discharging electricity into the water, and you can hear it if they're near the surface. It sounds like sizzling on the surface of the water, and it stuns the fish, and they float to the top, and then the eels will eat them. Well, if you're in the way of that discharge, you get zapped and you drown, and that's a big problem in the Amazon. It's not like lots of people die this way, but I've known people who both. I've heard of people who've died, and I've known at least one guy who got electrocuted fishing because he caught an electric eel. And I got electrocuted killing one. I thrust a machete into its head, and the head was this big. And I got a very powerful electric shock through the machete.
This thing's huge.
Yeah, it was this big. Yeah.
Whoa.
It was probably 6-7 feet long, and it was stuck in a stream because the river had receded, and then it got stuck. It got marooned in this stream, and me and Michael Jackson were crossing the stream. We called him Jacko. We were crossing the stream, and he was probably 11, 12 years old, and I was 19 at the time, and we're crossing this stream, and I saw the eel under this log, and I pointed it out to him, and he said, "We have to kill that because it's dangerous. If you come walking by, you step your foot in there, you can get zapped." So I had my machete, and my machete had a wooden handle with copper wrapped around the handle, and copper's one of the best conductors of electricity. Yeah. And I'm like, nah, that's probably not a good idea. So I grabbed his machete, which had a plastic handle, and I positioned myself above the eel, and its head is just sort of sticking out under this log, and I thrust the machete into its head, right in the middle of its head, and it was like sticking my finger into a socket. I mean, I got zapped for a couple of seconds, and I screamed, and the machete went flying out of my hand.
Whoa!
I mean, it's amazing how those things can produce electricity. And this was probably not intentional by the electric eel, because he didn't know he was about to get his machete thrust into his head. But they can produce a lot of electricity. And then of course you have the vampire catfish.
What is that?
The vampire catfish is these little catfish that, let's say that they have spikes on their bodies, and they like to lodge themselves in various orifices. Let's just put it that way, male and female. And so,
are they transparent?
As a general rule, you do not urinate in the rivers in the Amazon.
Because of...
I'll let your imaginations figure that out.
Wow.
Great. I was going up the river one time, and there was a doctor on the boat, and he was going up the river to extract one of these from a young girl. And the vampire catfish, very, very nasty. So there's all kinds of other things we could talk about, but yeah, I mean, everything wants to eat you when you go in the Amazon. And it's strange, because I've been in the jungles of Central America, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and those are rainforests, tropical jungles. They have a lot of the same animals, but for whatever reason, they don't feel as hostile as the Amazon. There's something uniquely hostile about the Amazon jungle. So I've had malaria 5 times, yellow fever once, never uta, never vampire catfish, but I have been electrocuted by the eel. So I have a lot of respect for that jungle. And I was going to say the worst thing, this happened to me. The most dangerous thing in my mind, aside from the mosquitoes, is getting lost. Getting lost in that forest.
I was going to say, that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. I was lost for
How
a period
long?
of time. Not a long time, just a few hours. But it was enough to freak me out. Because there's no landmarkers and there's no indication of what direction you're going in besides the sun. And you can barely see the sun because the canopy's so thick in places. And when you get lost in the Amazon, you're in a labyrinth. All the trees look the same. You have no idea what direction you're going in. And you don't want to get stuck in the Amazon at night, unprepared, like without the proper equipment, a tent, because you just get eaten alive by mosquitoes and other things, and that's...
Did somebody find you, or did you kind of get yourself?
Yeah, that's a long story. But I eventually made my way back out. I was deep. I was really far out there when this happened. It was a terrifying experience, and I was only lost for a few hours. My friends out there, like Grover, he's been lost for days.
Dude.
So it's a hostile environment. I have a lot of respect for people who live out there. And
are you going back in when you're out there in a couple of days?
Yeah. Yeah, we're going up in a riverboat. I'm chartering a riverboat, and we're going to go up the River Masan. They used to call me Masan out there.
Really?
Yeah, because I was this young 19-year-old gringo with dreadlocks, long hair, and be smoking my pipe, and I was an anomaly, obviously. And so they called me Masan because I was on the River Masan. And at that time, gringos didn't really go up that river. They did in the first mile of the river. Sometimes gringos would go up there, but they didn't go way out where I was.
Make sure you get new headshots when you're out there with your pipe. Next month.
I intend to.
Just rebrand.
I intend to.
There we go. So you said you're gonna. Can you talk to us about the alien skulls that you're looking at, the mummies?
Yeah. So when I go to Peru, I've got a few things I'm doing. I'm going to go look at a potential megalithic site that was discovered recently, and I don't know if these are real megaliths, but if these are artificial blocks, in other words, if these are cut stones, they're massive, the biggest megaliths ever discovered in Peru. After I do that, I'm going to go into the desert to Ica, and I've already coordinated with the curator of the museum at the University of Ica, where these anomalous mummies. There's 3 anomalous mummies in this museum in the university that have been discovered. They were discovered years ago, probably 10 years ago. And they refer to them as the tridactyl beings. And the reason they call them tridactyl is because they only have 3 fingers and 3 toes, very long. And they're bizarre. Their eye sockets are overly large. Their skulls are slightly elongated. They look like aliens. And these things have been featured on Gaia TV. They've been featured by Jaime Maussan, the ufologist from Mexico. So they've made the rounds, and I never really paid much attention to them because I'm cautious about what comes out of Peru. There's a lot of fakery. Peru they're really good at hoaxing artifacts in Peru. So I'm very, very cautious. Same with Mexico. Central and South America in general, but especially Mexico and Peru. There's a lot of hoaxing. And I'm sure most people are aware of the little mummies that were featured by Jaime Maussan. Last year or the year before, they had like this congressional meeting in Mexico, and they brought out these little mummies that were about that big, and they were like in these boxes, and Jaime Maussan, he believes that they were actually living biological creatures. I don't. I'm not convinced that the little ones. I'm persuaded at this point that the little ones, they're not. I wouldn't call them fake. I would say that the little ones, the little mummies, the little so-called alien mummies, are real artifacts, but they're mummified dolls. In my opinion, I think they're composites of various kinds of animals, and they were created maybe by an indigenous culture hundreds of years ago for whatever reason, maybe for ceremonial purposes. But the large ones that are in Ica, I forget how many there are. I think there's 7 or 9. There's various of these larger mummies. They're in the fetal position, and these are about 6 feet tall, 5'9", 6 feet tall. They're exquisitely preserved. And these mummies are potentially real. In other words, these may have been living, breathing creatures at one time. So there's been many tests done, and I've not really paid too much attention because Gaia TV picked it up and because of some of the characters who have been involved in the story. So I sort of stayed away from it. But as the years have progressed and I've been interfacing with the people who've been doing the research in Peru, the Peruvian scientists and some of the individuals who are involved with these mummies, I think these are high caliber people, and I'm becoming increasingly convinced that these things could be real. And if they're real, it rewrites history. I mean, if these things are real, and then I have another interesting connection to these mummies. The individual who discovered them, or at least discovered some of them, I believe he discovered all of them. He has been intentionally misdirecting everybody. He is he's a famous French explorer who lives in Peru. His name is Thierry Jamin, and I don't pronounce his name right because you have to. I don't speak French, but that's how an American would pronounce his name. And he's an exceptional explorer. He's the real deal. And he discovered all kinds of lost Incan cities, and he's looking for I can't remember the name of it. It's on the tip of my tongue. He's looking for the famous lost city of the Inca, and that's his quest. But he's also involved in other interesting things in Peru, and he told me where he discovered these mummies, where he actually discovered them. See, he's misdirecting the press. He hasn't told anyone else where he's actually discovered the mummies, but he told me. And I won't say where, because he hasn't disclosed it publicly. But he discovered them underground in a tunnel. And when he told me that, I was very interested in that detail. Because when I was in Peru a few years ago, I was on a film project, my own film project. I made a film series called Chasing Legends. Have you had an opportunity to see the Chasing Legends film series?
Not yet.
There's a film series, and it's only available in my members community. It's 3 episodes in this film series that we were making. The Discovery Channel picked it up, and then they dropped it.
Why?
And that is a very intriguing story right there if you want to hear it. But this was supposed to be published. It was going to air right up against Ancient Aliens, and it was a whole ordeal. But they ended up dropping it, and this was all during the COVID era. So we had to we decided to just do something privately with it. But anyway, when we were in Peru, we were exploring we were in the desert in Paracas. We were studying the elongated skull race, the Paracas people, and they have those very anomalous, accentuated, elongated skulls. And there's strange, there are strange physiological details about those elongated skull people. Like their orbital sockets, their eye sockets are overly large, like significantly larger than ours, which means their eyes were larger than ours. They're very diminutive. You see these skulls online. If you type in Paracas elongated skulls, you'll see these. They look freakish. They look alien. I've held them. I've seen them. I mean, you can dig them up in the Paracas area.
And you believe these were living things, not
yes.
dolls? Yeah,
There's no question about these ones.
Okay.
These people, this was a culture, the Paracas culture. And if you consult with conventional archaeology, the archaeologists believe that all of the cases of the elongation of the skulls among the Paracas people is cranial deformation, headboarding. It's cradle headboarding. There's nothing genetically anomalous about them, in their opinion. I contest that assertion. I believe that the nobility of the Paracas people, the noble family, that the elongation of their skulls is genetic. It's a genetic deviation in the human genome, deviation from our genome. So there's something strange going on. It's a genetic variation, and the other members of the Paracas culture that have elongated skulls that aren't members of the noble family, that's cradle headboarding. That's emulation.
Just a copy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can see the difference. When there's cradle headboarding, oftentimes you can see the markings of the headboarding and of the banding on the skull. But on the most bizarre skulls, the ones that have the most accentuated elongation, those skulls don't have any markings of cradle headboarding. So I believe those are genetic. So we're talking about a subspecies of Homo sapien. That's what we're talking about. And they're diminutive. And so they often get associated with the Nephilim. People say, oh, those are Nephilim, just because they're anomalous.
Yeah.
And people make the mistake of thinking they're very large. Because the way that the photos are taken online, you might think that those are very large beings because their skulls look big, right? Because they're so bizarre looking. When in fact, these are very diminutive people. They're small. They're much more akin to gnomes than they are giants. They're very small people. We're talking 4.5 feet tall, 4.5 to 4 to 4.5 feet tall in a lot of cases. These are very small people.
So what's your postulation? What are they?
So imagine this. You have like these gnomes, basically, with elongated skulls, red hair, very large eyes, and we discovered that they were living underground. It's not very well known. In my film series, Chasing Legends with Timothy Alberino, in my film series, I go out into the Paracas Desert, into the Paracas National Park, and I brought with me L.A. Marsuli and Chase Kletsky. L.A. and Chase did genetic testing on the skulls, and they did a phenomenal job. L.A. did a great job. They did a very scientific analysis. L.A. and Mondo Gonzalez and Chase Kletsky, and I think they tested like some 50-odd skulls, and the DNA results that they got, they were looking for nuclear DNA. Nuclear DNA informs you about the father, the paternal line. Mitochondrial DNA informs you about the mother, the maternal line. Nuclear DNA is very difficult to get because it's only in the nucleus of the cell. Mitochondrial DNA is in different areas. Mitochondrial DNA is much more available. And they didn't get any nuclear DNA, but the mitochondrial DNA pointed to various parts of Europe, the Middle East primarily, but parts of Asia. So, in other words, the Paracas people, it appears, migrated over to Peru. They're not indigenous. And at least some of them came from the Middle East. We conducted a genetic test as well. We extracted a couple of teeth with Chase Kletsky and L.A. Marsuli during our investigation, myself and my partner, Gary Haven. And we had our teeth tested. Of course, we wanted nuclear DNA. There was almost no chance we were going to get any, and we didn't. But our mitochondrial DNA indicated haplogroup M. And haplogroup M is a very broad haplogroup, but it's not indigenous to the Americas.
So migration again.
Migration. This culture, these bizarre people migrated from over the sea, clearly, sometime in the distant past. And we went out into the desert, and I had an archaeologist with us named Jose Pinilla. And we went and we explored what very few people who study the elongated skulls, the Paracas elongated skulls, know anything about this aspect of this culture. They were living underground. They were living in these, we describe them as underground, subterranean longhouses. So you would see these little hills in the desert. And the Paracas desert is barren. I mean, it's like the surface of Mars. It's barren. And you see these little hills, like rows of hills, and they're long. That's why they're like longhouses, but subterranean. So what you're looking at is the roof. And it's ingenious. The way that they would build these is they would dig down about 20 feet or more. They would create these subterranean dwellings, and then they would raise a roof over it, and the roof was made, the rafters were whale bones. So you had the ribs of the whales, blue whales and sperm whales, and then they would pack in between the ribs, they would pack in earth, and they would pack in organic material, like the corpses of seals and birds and organic material. And what would happen is that organic material would begin to decompose, and it would create a natural heating effect. Mm-hmm. The decomposition, and it would heat the interior of the subterranean dwelling. Ingenious. And that's where the Paracas people lived. So you got these bizarre, elongated skull people. So imagine in your head, 4.5 foot tall being, overly large eyes, okay? Really accentuated, elongated skulls, bright red hair, living underground.
So J.R. Tolkien copied these people to create the Shires.
It would seem so. Of course, he knew nothing of them at the time. But so the Paracas culture, the central of the Paracas culture was at a place called Chongos. They call it the Chongos Necropolis.
This is when they migrated, the Chongos was the new
Chongos
place.
Necropolis, this was the center, the center of their civilization, or at least one of them. But some archaeologists believe this was the center of their civilization. Okay. And it's in the deserts of Pisco, which is right by Paracas, a town right by Paracas, north of Paracas. And we went out into this desert. We were looking for Inca gold at this point. That's a whole other story. But we were driving by on our way to this area that we were searching for treasure. And along the road, there was this large adobe pyramid made of adobe bricks.
Okay.
And it's very ancient, and it was constructed by the Paracas people. And it's called the Chongos Pyramid. And generally speaking, that area is called the Chongos Necropolis. And when you explore this area, you see the remains of all kinds of burials. The Paracas would bury their nobility in burial bundles. And the bundles look like, they're sort of like a teardrop shape. And it was fabric, layers of fabric, Paracas fabric, which is very exquisite fabric. And it's very elaborately designed with bright colors, worth millions of dollars on the black market.
Whoa.
But inside of these bundles, you would have the mummies, the nobility, which are mummified, and they're in the fetal position. And usually they have their hands on their face like this. It's freaky. It's really freaky looking. And most of the time, if you find a burial bundle, it's going to be an elongated skull because it's the nobility. And in the Chongos Necropolis, in that area, you see shards of fabric everywhere. You see red hair. You see skulls. And if you dig, you find elongated skulls. It's just all over the place. And the grave robbers have really done a lot of damage there because there's all kinds of artifacts. Mm-hmm. And they're looking primarily for the they're looking primarily for the Paracas mantles, which are worth, as I said, millions of dollars on the black market.
Those are like the fabric that the bundles are?
Yeah. And so we're driving by the Chongo's necropolis, and we see the Chongo's pyramid. Every day we're driving by, and I'm looking at it, because we're headed for this lake, because there's supposed to be Inca treasure in it. And as I'm looking at this pyramid one day, I thought to myself, there's a tunnel under that pyramid. I just had this strong intuition. There's a tunnel under that pyramid. I know it. And we had with us, myself and Gary Haven. Gary and I produced the films. We had procured state-of-the-art, ground-penetrating technology from Russia. But this technology operates off of a drone platform, so we can fly it. We can fly the GPR unit, and there's 2 antennas that we could attach to it. One is a shallow penetrating antenna that high resolution. It can see 15 feet under the ground. It can see, you can see a quarter 15 feet under the ground in the right conditions. And the other antenna can see 300 feet under the ground. And so that's for structures, if you're looking for structures, right? So if you're looking for artifacts, you use the high-resolution shallow antenna. If you're looking for caverns or structures under the ground, stone structures, the foundations of buildings, you use the deep penetrating antenna. And we took our drone over there, we took our GPR unit over there, and we got permission, and we scanned that whole area. And guess what we found?
A tunnel.
We found 2 intersecting artificial tunnels 100 feet below the pyramid. These tunnels are so big you could drive a semi-truck through them.
What the heck?
Guess where the alien mummies were discovered?
In those tunnels? Or at the intersection?
I'm not going to be too specific here.
Okay.
In tunnels, not far from there, under the ground.
And this is the French guy who discovered these.
So when I talked to him and I realized that, and I'm not going to disclose exactly where he found them, but when he told me where he found these mummies, I was intrigued, to say the least, because I believe they have something to do with the Paracas culture. Dare I say that there was a non-human species interbreeding with the Paracas people.
Wait,
and
you mean like
the hybrid of the hybrid that was produced through this union would be the elongated skull Paracas people.
So it's not a Nephilim. A Nephilim is also a Nephilim is a fallen angel with a human, but this would be a non-human with a different.
I would contest. Let's put it this way. I know there's a popular contention out there that a Nephilim is a hybrid. That's what a Nephilim. It's a hybrid of any kind. I would contest that. I would say that specifically, biblically speaking, a Nephilim is a giant, is the offspring of the Watchers and women, and that Nephilim are specifically giants. That's what I would say. I have a very narrow definition of Nephilim, but there's a lot of other people out there who've made who've taken the term Nephilim and have defined it much more broadly. So they believe, like my colleague Eli Marsuli would say, that a Nephilim is basically any kind of creature that is the result of hybridization.
And you're more narrow.
And my definition would be much more narrow. A Nephilim is a giant. That's in fact where the term derives from. I don't believe it comes from Nephal, by the way. Most people assume that the term Nephilim comes from the Hebrew word Nephal, which means to fall or fallen. That's how that's where they how they derive the term the fallen ones, because it comes from Nephal. I don't think so. I would be much more aligned with the late Dr. Michael Heiser, who contended from a scholarly position that in fact the word Nephilim derives from the Aramaic word. It's an Aramaic transliteration. And the Aramaic word means giants. It literally means giants. So he believes that the word Nephilim came from the Aramaic. It was not translated into Hebrew. It was transliterated into Hebrew. I believe it was something like, I don't recall, I think it was Nephilim in Aramaic, and it became Nephilim in Hebrew. And that word was specifically used because it meant giants. And so that's why I would say Nephilim is specifically and exclusively a giant. That's my own opinion. So I wouldn't use the terminology Nephilim to describe the elongated skulls. For one thing, they're the opposite of giants. They're like gnomes.
They're tiny. Yeah.
Right. So this is something else.
Yeah.
I would give this a different definition in the lexicon of bizarre creatures on planet Earth. But I think there's a chance, and I'm not convinced yet. This is why I'm going to see these mummies. There's a chance that if these tridactyl beings existed, these mummified tridactyl beings, that they were worshipped by this indigenous people, they were venerated, and that they interbred with a human indigenous people who migrated over. I say indigenous, that's probably not the right terminology here. Let's say an anomalous faction, an anomalous culture that migrated over, perhaps from the Middle East, and interbred with this non-human species. And this non-human species appears to be subterranean. At least there's an indication that they were, in as much as they were real, might have been subterranean.
Do you believe that the non-human species could have been celestial, or is there should we
I don't
define
know.
that? Okay.
They very well could be terrestrial. They could be a crypto-terrestrial species. And this is just a hypothesis. I'm not sure I believe it yet. I'm not convinced of it yet.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting that some of the same features of those Paracas elongated skull people are to be found on these mummies, these, the so-called alien mummies in Peru. Again, the large ones, not the small ones. So my colleagues in Peru, this French explorer, for example, he believes that is in fact the case.
Really?
Yes, and he's never told anybody that, but he told me in our correspondence. And I'm not sure that he would want that publicized, but he believes that, because I proposed this to him. I said, what if the Paracas people with these elongated skulls, what if they are the product of interbreeding with this potential subterranean crypto-terrestrial non-human species? And he said, that's precisely what I have concluded. So again, he's the one who discovered them. So if that's the case, I mean, it rewrites history.
Well, it makes me almost wonder if the non-human species is celestial, which we don't know, but if they are, did they try again? Because that's where the Nephilim came from in the first place, but a different breed of celestial being, maybe. I don't
Maybe
know.
there were more intelligent species inhabiting the earth than Homo sapien.
It's true.
There's many different possibilities. Could they be extraterrestrial? Sure. Could they be indigenous to planet Earth? Could they be pre-Adamic? Sure. I mean, anything's possible. If these things were living, breathing creatures, anything is possible.
Yeah.
So, but again, their distinctive features are they're tridactyl, these long fingers and
they
toes.
look crazy, dude. We'll have to put a picture up on the.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're in the fetal position, just like the Paracas mummies in the bundles.
The bundles.
That's right. They're in the same position.
Yeah.
So they're probably mummified by the Paracas people. So they were discovered, let's say, in proximity.
Yeah.
In the general area where I discovered the tunnels. I mean, you could drive a semi-truck through these tunnels. They're clearly artificial.
So about that, with the tunnels underneath and then the monolithic structures that you're looking at, do you think that those were built by Nephilim or what's your take on how?
The Adobe pyramids were built by the Paracas people.
Those were. So the tunnels, you assume, were built by the Paracas people as well?
Yeah. Or by this anomalous non-human species.
Yeah.
Again, I just want to emphasize, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll
if
have you
these
back
mummies
in.
are a hoax or if they were real biological creatures. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just answering your question as to what I'm going to look at in Peru. And again, I've been invited by the curator to come and investigate. And he said, I can do whatever I want. I can do whatever kind of investigation I want. This time it's a preliminary thing. I'm just going to go look at them. I am going to film some stuff, and I'm going to put that material in my members community. I'll probably publish some of it on YouTube. But I'm eager to see these things up close.
Yeah. I'll say this real fast for the people listening, or maybe they've never heard of you for the first time. What you're saying, because can you hear how many times he's saying, like, I'm just making sure I don't know. This is all preliminary. That's indicative of the quality of researcher you are. Because some people got on the last video and they're like, this guy's making a bunch of assumptions. Look, I've like seen the inside of your portals and like gone through stuff. There's so much research and so much data you're doing. I don't feel like you make a lot of assumptions. And whenever you do, you're very clear that like you're making an assumption.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I get frustrated with people who are in my other researchers who are, let's say, in this community, who are researching Nephilim and things related to mysteries of the Bible. There are certain individuals who make very bold assertions about things, but don't add the caveat that this is my opinion.
Right.
This is just conjecture. Now, I will say that my friend and colleague Eli Marsuli, he does this all the time, and I love that about LA. LA will always say, "This is just conjecture. I'm just spitballing here." That's phenomenal. And like LA, that's what I do, because you have to be honest. You can't make these assertions and just go with it. And people, they listen to people like me. People online will listen to researchers such as myself, just like I used to do when I was getting into this. I would listen to researchers, prominent researchers, and they'll take what I say to the bank, right? Because they trust what I say, they trust my research, and I understand that. So I got to be very careful,
right,
that whatever information that I am transmitting is either I feel really confident about it and I can assert it with great confidence because I've done my homework, or I'm just spitballing here. We are just talking about potentialities. This is a realm of conjecture, right? And that's fine. I don't have any problem with people speculating. I love speculation. I'm in the business of speculation. And as long as people understand when someone is speculating, that's what's important to me.
Yep.
But there are people who take their speculations and they concretize them. And it's the worst thing that happens is when they make them theology, doctrine. And that's the worst. People get into real problems when they do that. And I stay away from that. Now, I make all kinds of mistakes all the time and I have to revise things. But, I try to be as honest as possible. I appreciate you saying that, because it's if you're going to call yourself a researcher, then you can do nothing else. You can do nothing less than try and be as honest as you can with the material. And that's why I try and make it evident when I'm in a realm of conjecture.
You do. That's what I wanted people to grab. It like makes you trustworthy, because if you say, like, we'll probably dovetail here through stuff that you have researched really well, and you won't caveat it with the same so pay attention, because if you say something without the caveat of like, I'm just spitballing,
that's right,
you've like done your research on it.
And I make explosive claims about things that I'm not that are not speculation. I'll say a statement right now to illustrate this point. Gray aliens exist. Full stop. That is not speculation. That is not conjecture.
There you go.
That is stone cold fact. See, so people hear me say a statement like that, and they think that's your opinion. Oh, no. That's a stone cold fact.
Yeah, they just think you're like a YouTuber is making stuff up. No. Okay, so can we go into something you have like done your due diligence on? When last time you were here, I bought your book, the triple interpretation translation of the Book of Enoch. I think you have 3 different translations in there.
I recently published Book of Enoch with the guys from the Blurry Creature podcast, Luke Rogers and Nate Henry. And I wrote the introduction and commentary for the Book of the Watchers. And so I've been studying the Book of Enoch for years. And I don't recall if we talked about the Book of Enoch last time we were together, but
Not much.
there's a lot of interest in the Book of Enoch now, a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of pastors are having to deal with this because their congregants are reading the Book of Enoch. And
Yep.
I remember when I was a young man, I had to have been 15. I was driving, so I had to have been 16 actually. I had just got my driver's license, and I went to Borders Bookstore. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
That once existed.
Blast from the past.
I went to Borders Bookstore, and I was perusing the aisle where they had all of the ancient tomes, all of the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha and all of this. And there was this big fat book, and it was really cool looking. They made it look like an ancient book, and it was the Pseudepigrapha. And inside of the Pseudepigrapha was the Book of Enoch, First Enoch. And I started reading it just because I was intrigued as a young man in this kind of thing. My father was a pastor of a non-denominational evangelical church, but I was just intrigued. I had I read the Book of Jude. I read the Book of Jude where he
talks about it.
Where Jude says that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, and then he inserts this excerpt of a prophecy from Enoch.
Extremely messianic.
And I'm reading this and I'm saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. Enoch was a prophet, and what he prophesied is not in the Bible, but here it is, an excerpt of it being quoted by Jude. And I thought, this has got to be important, right? I mean, if the apostles of Christ believe that Enoch had written something and were quoting it in the context of eschatological prophecy, then I'm really interested in that. That was it. So I was at Borders Bookstore reading portions of the Book of Enoch, and I thought, I'm buying this book. And it wasn't cheap. And I had this big tome, the Pseudepigrapha, and I came home with it under my arm. And I walked in my house, and my dad was in the kitchen. He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, this is the Pseudepigrapha." And he said, "What's the Pseudepigrapha?" And I said, "Oh, it's just some of the texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls and that are extra biblical." And he said, "Why'd you buy that? What are you doing with that?" And I said, "Well, it contains the Book of Enoch, and I'm interested in the Book of Enoch." And my dad was basically like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a minute."
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
What are you doing with that? Why are you bringing that into the house?
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, I'm interested in the Book of Enoch. It's quoted in Jude." And he basically just gave me a lecture about how dangerous this is. And I shouldn't be looking into this. This is not in the Bible. And he really didn't want me to read this. And this isn't to
I bet that made you really not want to read it.
well, he
You're
didn't
not
want me to have long hair and dreadlocks either.
Yeah.
But
You're not saying that to dishonor your dad.
No,
You're just
I was
saying
going to say, I'm not saying this to denigrate my dad at
It's the
all. My dad
culture.
was a phenomenal pastor,
Yeah.
and I had a great upbringing, and I had virtually the best father you could imagine.
Yeah.
And but he didn't understand my curiosity, and I get it. I'm a father of 5. I totally understand it. I don't understand why my oldest son likes to listen to gangster rap. Well, I do because he was on the football team, and that's what they listen to. But
You just built an equivalency between the Book of Enoch and gangster rap.
yeah, so he doesn't listen to gangster rap. He listens to rap, but he would definitely not define it as gangster rap.
Of course.
He's not listening to Snoop Dogg or something like that. But anyway, so I get it, but I was just curious. So I started reading Enoch, and that's where it began for me. Now, the Book of Enoch is a complex subject because we tend to be very binary, and I'm going to say we as in Christians. Christians tend to be very binary in their thinking.
Yes.
It's black, white, it's on, off, it's good, bad, it's godly or satanic.
Yep.
But almost nothing is that simple. Everything is complex. We are complex.
Yep.
people are complex, and I am the enemy of binary thinking. So when I approach a manuscript like the Book of Enoch, a text like the Book of Enoch, I'm not going to sit down and determine, okay, is this good or bad? Right? Is this scripture or is this satanic?
Right.
I don't think like that. I allow the text to inform me of what it is. And the Book of Enoch is a compilation of texts. It's a compilation, just like the Bible is a compilation, 66 books. The Book of Enoch is a compilation. It has at least 2 authors, if not multiple authors. And the various texts within the Book of Enoch, the various sections, were written at different periods of time. That's the first thing you have to understand when you're approaching this ancient text, is it's a compilation of texts written by various authors at different periods of time. Now, the earliest portions of the Book of Enoch, namely the Book of the Watchers and the Book of Parables, or the Parables, are unquestionably written, compiled before the birth of Christ. Most scholars will date the earliest portions of Enoch to 300 BC, but I think they're much older.
Yeah, they got to be older.
The latter portions of the Book of Enoch, the book of the courses of the heavenly luminaries, the dream visions, and so forth, are probably dated to after the birth of Christ, and have, in my opinion, I've read them several times. I've read through the Book of Enoch several times. Have a very distinct Merkaba, Jewish mystic influence, chariot mysticism, and are, I would say, are in the tradition of Second Temple Jewish mysticism. That's a really important distinction right there, what I just said. Okay, earliest portions are written before Christ, the latter portions are written after Christ, and are more synchronized with chariot mysticism, Merkaba. The other thing you have to understand is that there's 3 books of Enoch. There's First Enoch, which is called the Ethiopic Enoch. There's Second Enoch, which is referred to as the Slavonic Enoch. And then there's Third Enoch, which is referred to as the Hebrew Enoch. Second and Third Enoch are definitely written long after the birth of Christ. Second Enoch was probably written, nobody really knows, but probably written in the early Middle Ages. And the same thing with Third Enoch. They have nothing to do with First Enoch. They're not like a continuation of First Enoch. They're not in the same. They don't even really deal with the same content as First Enoch. So those of you who are interested in Enoch, be aware of that. First Enoch distinguishes itself because the earliest portions were written before Christ, and because it's from First Enoch and First Enoch exclusively that you get the excerpt in Jude, and that undergirds so much of ancient Hebraic cosmology. And only First Enoch. Second and Third Enoch are Jewish mysticism.
Ancient Hebrew, because what did you say there?
It's the Hebrew cosmology. So when scholars say Hebrew cosmology, and I'm not a scholar, when scholars say Hebrew cosmology, what they mean is the Hebrew worldview of the cosmos.
Got it. Okay.
And the beings in it.
Got it.
And both the Old and New Testament of the Bible, let's put it this way, you cannot extract, you cannot separate the content of First Enoch from both the Old and New Testament of the Bible. It is integral to so much of what's written in the Bible. It's not extra biblical, it's foundational. The earliest portions of, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, the earliest portions of First Enoch, the Book of the Watchers, which is the narrative, that's the story, and then the parables, which is prophetic content pertaining to the end of the age. You cannot separate that content from the 66 books of the Bible. Not only is it quoted verbatim, the Book of the Watchers is quoted verbatim in Jude, as we said. The Book of Enoch is continually referenced, not directly, but allusions to the Book of Enoch, to the story of Enoch, what I call the Enochian tale, are all over the Old and New Testament. Jesus makes allusions to it. Okay, so
culturally referenced, where people would understand.
Absolutely. So that is unequivocal. Now, first Enoch, the Ethiopic Enoch, is called the Ethiopic Enoch or the Ethiopian Enoch because the Book of Enoch was, at some point in time, expunged from the scriptoriums in Europe and the Middle East. It was exterminated, extirpated, and this was done intentionally. So, in other words, it was eradicated. And this was because of the controversy in the early church over whether or not First Enoch should be included in the Bible, in the canon. And there were many early church fathers who argued that it should be, such as Tertullian.
Well, but was this expunged before like the canonization?
Yes.
So
when the conversations were ensuing about what material, what manuscripts, what texts should be canonized. Now, the Jews canonized their Bible first, and of course they excluded anything that we would call the New Testament. And these were rabbinical Jews. These were not Messianic Jews. So the Christian church followed suit in regard to the Old Testament. We pretty much just adopted the Jewish Old Testament, their canon, and then we added into the text of the New Testament. And we followed their model for the Old Testament, and again, we just copied what they did for the Old Testament. And then they had certain parameters for the books of the New Testament. And I personally think they did a very good job with the canon. They were very careful. I understand why First Enoch was excluded, because the authorship of First Enoch could not be verified. That was one problem. It could not be accurately dated, which wasn't so much of a problem back then, but we can say that today in modern times. It's difficult to accurately date. Whereas the other books of the Old Testament, we more or less know when they were written, and we know when the books of the New Testament were written more or less as well. The Book of Enoch, you can't accurately date it except to say it was written at the earliest portions at least 300 years before Christ for very particular reasons. So those are problems. The authorship was a big problem. So authorship was important in determining what books were going to be canonized. It wasn't a deal breaker, because there are several books in the New Testament which the authorship today is still in question. Yeah. The book of Hebrews, for example. We
think it was written by this, but we don't know.
Right, we don't really know. So the authorship wasn't as big of a deal as most people make it about, because if you read about the book of Enoch, why isn't the book of Enoch in the Bible? One of the primary reasons that's given is the authorship was in question. But clearly, for me, from my point of view, it's the content of First Enoch that made it unsavory for some of those guys who were involved in determining the canon, and that's evident. Specifically, Augustine, or Augustine. Mm-hmm. I always forget which of those pronunciations is right for his name. I did that on the last interview with you as well. He was one of the primary reasons why the Book of Enoch was not only rejected, but exterminated. And by the 5th century AD, you couldn't find the Book of Enoch anywhere. So this is a manuscript that was widely distributed in the early church age. I believe personally that were you to transport yourself back to the time of Christ and enter a synagogue, any synagogue of the Jews, you would find in their scriptorium, where they kept the other sacred scrolls, you would find a scroll of the Book of Enoch. Now, it would probably not have looked exactly like First Enoch that we have today, but it would have been similar. I think they considered it scripture. I believe the Jews considered First Enoch scripture. Why did they exclude it? Why did the Jews exclude it from their canon? That's easy.
Messianic
That's
prophecy.
easy. I can answer that one definitively. Tertullian answers that question. The reason why the Jews rejected the book of Enoch, First Enoch, in their canon is because it testifies of the man they crucified. That's why they rejected it. Full stop. That's why they rejected it. Tertullian knew this. He wrote a treatise on it. And of course, they were appalled. The Jews of the first century were clearly appalled by the notion that angels could have sexual intercourse with human women. So that notion was rejected. And I think that's the main reason, the primary reason why the Book of Enoch was excluded from the canon was because its content was unsavory to certain people, to certain church fathers. But nevertheless, the story of Enoch is foundational to the biblical narrative. Foundational, Old and New Testament. And the prophecies of Enoch, namely in the book of parables, in First Enoch, is foundational to the eschatology of the writers of the New Testament. The writers of the New Testament were exceedingly conversant with the book of Enoch. In fact, their Christology, their understanding of who Jesus was, much of it is derived directly from the oracles of Enoch in the parables. And so as I said, and these are the earliest portions of the book of Enoch, right, of First Enoch. These are the ones that I have the most confidence in because they were written before Christ. And the book of Enoch, the book of the Watchers, is the historical narrative. It's the story of the Watchers who descend and wed the daughters of men and progenerate a race of giants through them, and that whole story. That's the story of the Watchers. That's the historical narrative. Directly after that, in First Enoch, you have the parables. And the parables are, it's a prophetic experience that Enoch has. He's dreaming, by the way. He doesn't go anywhere. People have a misconception that he went up to heaven. No. He's dreaming. He says so in the parables. He's dreaming, and he has these dreams that he records. And the dreams, much of the parables have to do with the Son of Man. That is a title. It's not a description like in Daniel. Daniel saw one who had the appearance of a son of man. That's a descriptor. That means I saw someone who looked like a human being. In the book of Enoch, it is a definitive title, the Son of Man. And some of the most astounding prophecies pertaining to the Son of Man are to be found in First Enoch. As accurate as anything you'll find in the Old Testament. And when I say accurate, I mean fulfilled in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. For example, it talks about Jesus being the light of the Gentiles. It talks about Jesus that we would be saved in his name. In his name they would be saved. That he would be a staff to the righteous. That the righteous would hang upon him. That's an allusion to the crucifixion. Christ said we are crucified with Christ.
Yep.
Paul said we are crucified with Christ.
Yep.
I can go on and on and on. I should have brought my book of Enoch in with me. I forgot it, but I really should have. But because I could read you excerpts from the book of Enoch that are astounding in their accuracy, in the Christological content, predictions that would be fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth. And so if these prophecies are true in the parables concerning Jesus, then what we have in First Enoch in the parables is a mechanism of authentication built into the book of Enoch. What do I mean by that? Well, the angel informed John that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy in Revelation. So if the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, that means that if you have a manuscript that is recording the oracles of Enoch pertaining to the Son of Man that are fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth, then that is an authentication of that prophecy, because the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So the book of parables in First Enoch is self-authenticating. And I can tell you with great confidence that it is true. So, the book of the Watchers, the first two sections of Enoch, the oldest, and the book of parables are true. They undergird both the historical narrative of the Bible, and they provide the eschatological understanding of who Jesus is. And this is, again, this is what's informing the writers of the New Testament as they write about who Jesus is. How do they know? And by the way, I think we said this last time I was on your show, and forgive me for repeating content here, but Jesus had various messianic titles that he could have used to describe himself.
And he picked a...
He could have referred to any number of messianic titles from the Old Testament. And yet, the one he uses by far the most to refer to himself is the definitive title, the Son of Man.
Yep. And you know the Jews accepted or knew that because they were so offended when they heard it.
They knew precisely who he was claiming to be.
Yep.
Because they were conversant with the oracles of Enoch.
Yep.
So when Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, they knew exactly who he was claiming to be.
Yep.
It wasn't just something he liked to call himself. And when I was a young man, I used to read the New Testament and think, why is he calling himself this? Isn't he the Son of God?
Yeah.
Why does he call himself the Son of Man? And scholars will say, well, he says that because of the reference in Daniel. I saw one who was like a son of man. That's it. There, we solved that. No, that is a description of a human being. It is not a definitive title.
You only get that in Enoch.
The only place you get that is in First Enoch, in the parables. And First Enoch, the parables, most of the content, most of the oracles of Enoch pertain to the Son of Man and who he was and what he was going to do. Yeah. And it is specifically fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth. And that's why, by the way, when Jesus is standing before Caiaphas, when the Sanhedrin is judging him, and he said, "Who are you, the Son of God?" And Jesus says, "It is as you say, and you will see the Son of Man coming. You will see the Son of Man at the right hand of power, coming in the clouds of heaven." And what does Caiaphas do? He tears his robes. Blasphemy.
Yes, like a child.
And why does he do that? And if you read New Testament commentators, they're going to say, because Jesus was claiming to be God in affirmation of the Trinity. No. The Trinity aside. It's not because Jesus is claiming to be God. It's because Jesus is claiming to be the Son of Man from the oracles of Enoch. And that Son of Man was going to return to the earth and judge the nations. Jesus was claiming to be that Son of Man, seated at the right hand of power. That's why he tore his robes, because they were conversant with the oracles of Enoch, just like the writers of the New Testament. So we have deprived ourselves in the West for hundreds of years as Christians of not only the historical narrative that undergirds so much of the narrative of the Bible, but we've deprived ourselves of the oracles of Enoch, which predicted the coming of the Son of Man and provided the writers of the New Testament with their Christology, with their understanding of who he was. And we've deprived ourselves of this. So, and what I find to be fascinating, it gives me chills when I think about it, is when you open up Enoch, and I really made a mistake not bringing my...
I have it on Kindle if you want to pull up the Kindle version, but...
Well, I had all these highlights and stuff in my Enoch book, but when you open up Enoch and you read the beginning of Enoch, Enoch addresses his manuscript to the generation that will be living at the end of the age in the tribulation.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So this might very well be the earliest manuscript ever penned. Let's say the earliest prophecy ever penned by human hand. And it's addressed to the last generation.
When do you think it was written? Because they say scholars say 300 BC.
So
but
I believe that, here's what I believe. I believe that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, wrote the book of Enoch. Whatever it was called, maybe it wasn't called the book of Enoch. He wrote the prophecy. He made a record of the events that precipitated the flood. And then he wrote the oracles. He wrote the parables. And perhaps some other content as well. But I'm persuaded that at least he wrote the Book of the Watchers and the parables.
This was like 3400 BC, 3200?
Oh, this was...
Or before that?
This was more like 12,000 BC.
Okay, got it.
And this would have been in the antediluvian world, in the antediluvian age. And he entrusted these documents, these manuscripts, to his son Methuselah, who entrusted them to his son Lamech, who entrusted them to his son Noah. So I believe that a written account from Enoch was preserved on the ark. Now, what happened to it from there? I don't know. Maybe it was preserved all the way until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Maybe it was lost in the destruction of the temple or not. But I personally believe, at the very least, the oral tradition was preserved. So if you ask me, when was the book of Enoch written? And I'm not talking about the modern R.H. Charles translation or one of the other Brenton translate, whatever the other translations are. I would say that the original manuscript of Enoch was written by his hand many thousands of years ago and entrusted to his descendants. Now, is that exactly the manuscript we have today in 1st Enoch? Probably not. And why do I say that? Because it's apparent that the early church fathers were quoting from an Enochian manuscript that we don't have today. So we're missing something that they had in regard to Enoch.
Do you have any examples of that, or is that just as a researcher you can tell?
Yeah, you can go and look at, I have it. If you want to, by the way, if people want to inform themselves of this, everything I'm saying is in my introduction to the Book of Enoch. You can get our Book of Enoch on Amazon. You'll see me as the author. It's just called the Book of Enoch, like everything else. And our Book of Enoch, I wish I had it. In our Book of Enoch, there's a picture of Enoch like sitting at a desk writing on a manuscript.
Yeah.
And I write this in the intro. I wrote a really good introduction, if I do say so myself, because I tell you how we got the Book of Enoch again, and there's some things about James Bruce, who he's the reason why we have the Book of Enoch today, because he went to Ethiopia and he found copies of it, 3 copies of it in Ethiopia. I believe James Bruce was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. He was a Freemason. And very interesting. He was a collateral relative of the famous Robert the Bruce, the Scot, who fought for independence, Scottish independence from the British Crown, from the English Crown. And fascinating story, by the way, of James Bruce, documented in my introduction of 1st Enoch. And I also write commentary for the Book of the Watchers. So we also have in our Book of Enoch, we created concept art. Nate generated concept art that it's a very unique perspective on the Book of Enoch, and it's so I wrote some text describing certain scenes from the historical narrative, the Book of the Watchers, and then we added in concept art that go along with the text. No other Book of Enoch has this, and this isn't your typical Bible illustrations. I mean, we depict the Watchers and the Giants in a very unique way. So I have a very different perception of the antediluvian world than most people. I think we talked to some about that somewhat last time I was here. But the Book of Enoch it's not additional, it's not extra biblical, it's not mysticism. The Book of Enoch is foundational to the 66 books of the Bible. And again, I'm going to add a caveat. The earliest portions of the book of Enoch, Book of the Watchers, and the Parables. Now, the latter portions of the book of Enoch, people make a big mistake here. And this is why we were talking about the binary thinking in the beginning. So most Christians who accept the book of Enoch, well, let's start with most Christians who reject the book of Enoch, reject it out of hand. That's extra biblical. It's useful for understanding language or whatever, but it's extra biblical, so you shouldn't take it as scripture. Whatever, okay? But the people who accept the book of Enoch also make the same mistake. They say, it's true. The book of Enoch is true. It should be in the Bible. And I say, wait a minute, on both sides. Hold on a minute. Let's be much more high resolution in our analysis of the book of Enoch. Let's ferret out what we can confirm to be true based on the content, based on the historical narrative and the Christological prophecies, which are self-authenticating in the person of Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
Let's call that true. And let's divide that from the latter portions of Enoch, which clearly have elements of Jewish mysticism mixed into them. And let's be careful. Let's be cautious on how we approach this, on how we handle this. Let's not just say, this is scripture, this whole thing is true, or this whole thing is extra biblical and dangerous. Let's be careful. Let's be high resolution in our analysis. And let's understand that although very interesting, the latter portions of Enoch are not as trustworthy. And this is, by the way, where everybody derives the proof text for flat Earth. By the way,
The second and third book?
in the latter portions of Enoch. That is Merkaba mysticism. A lot of it is Merkaba mysticism. And it's in that tradition. And so people should have that approach when handling the book of Enoch. It's interesting content, certainly, the latter portions. Some of that stuff may derive from an earlier manuscript, but we don't know. So I handle it with care. But the Book of the Watchers and the Parables, you can take that to the bank. You can cash that check. That is true.
I'm just happy you're not a flat earther.
I am not a flat earther. I'm the antithesis.
Didn't you start like
of a flat
some sort of
earther.
discussion in the comments on the last one, having to make that more clear?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure
Well,
you
we
did
were
too.
talking with
Yeah.
Gary Wayne, who wrote the Genesis 6 conspiracy. And he's not a flat earther either, but there was he didn't want to talk about it. So then,
Well,
you have
because
comments
there's no
like,
more contentious a topic than flat Earth. I'll talk about it.
Why?
Oh, well, it's simple.
Here we go.
Because flat Earth has become a religion. It's a religious creed for people. What people have done is they've taken this idea, which this phenomenon began 2014, 2015, really started to
very new.
Really started to pick up steam in 2016, 2017, 2018. It was becoming, you started to have the flat Earth conferences, and you had your personalities out there. Some of them secular, many of them Christian. And what they did was they took this hypothesis. I'm going to be very, very nice and call it a hypothesis. And which they found to be interesting and intriguing. And people say, well, people always tell me, you haven't researched it enough.
Classic.
And I can guarantee you, I can assure you that I have thoroughly, quote unquote, researched flat Earth. And why do I put in the quotation marks? Because research flat Earth means watch a bunch of YouTube videos. That's what it means. To these people, that's what it means. And what it's done is it's taken on the aspects of a cult. There are these phrases that are repeated, regurgitated, that started with some of the early flat Earth personalities, like Eric Dubé, for example. And these ideas were perpetuated, and they were wrong from the beginning, both scientific and theological statements that were erroneous from the beginning were repeated, were regurgitated, and perpetuated. So that this YouTube video, the early YouTube video, there's videos by Mark Sargent and others that have erroneous statements in them, but those erroneous statements have become codified into a new religious creed. And most flat earthers that I encounter are religious, are Christians, most flat earthers. And I would say today, most flat earthers are in the Christian community. It wasn't necessarily the case back in 2014, 15, and 16. I'd say it was secular flat earthers, and then a lot of Christians jumped in, and now a lot of the secular flat earthers have dissolved away. And you have primarily a Christian community that's holding on to the flat earth theory. I have been following this intensely. I have been a very studious in monitoring the flat earth movement from the beginning.
Thank you for doing that for all of us, Tim, by the way.
Well,
so we don't have to.
It's quite the tedious labor, I can tell you. But I have watched all the same videos as flat earthers. I have seen all of their proof. Okay? I have familiarized myself with all of it. I have never once been even slightly persuaded that it's true. Now, I don't deride and denigrate flat earthers. I think that there's enough compelling stuff there that I can at least understand why they believe in flat earth. But where it crosses the line for me is when they take the flat earth, when they take this, again, I'm going to be very nice, this hypothesis of theirs, and they integrate it into their faith in Christ.
Theology, yeah.
Into their theology, that's a better way to say it. They integrate it so deeply into their theology that you can no longer extract flat earth from the tenets, the fundamental tenets of their faith. It is so deeply embedded that if you were to extract flat earth, they would have no faith. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
So that is exceedingly dangerous. And I have seen marriages break up over flat earth, families go to war with each other, churches split over flat earth.
Oh, my word.
It is the most divisive topic I have ever witnessed in 40 years of sucking air on this planet. It is the most divisive thing I have ever witnessed. Hebrew roots is close. The Hebrew roots movement. Flat earth is worse. And a lot of flat earth people are Hebrew roots people.
I don't even know what Hebrew roots is.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But flat earth is, I believe, and I know a lot of flat earth, you guys, this is going to be the most, you're going to get the most hostile comments you've ever gotten ever on any of your videos.
Yes.
Let's do it. Let's break the record right now.
Let's do it.
Let's break the record.
I'm in.
I believe that, and I honestly believe this, okay? I believe that flat earth, that this movement is artificial. I believe it is...
Does artificial mean
I'm
like
looking
demonic?
for the word here. I'm looking for the word. What's the word I want here?
Demonic.
No, I wouldn't say demonic. I would say it is a... what's the word I'm looking
I thought
for
we were
here?
going for hate comments.
No, I got it right on the tip of my tongue.
14,000.
Yeah.
I'm grasping for a word that's escaping me.
Like a psyop?
A psyop. That's the word.
Okay,
I believe that flat earth is a psyop. Back in 2014, maybe earlier, maybe 2012, I think that the seeds were planted on the internet, or let's say that the coals were planted all over the internet, and then they were fanned into flames intentionally. And I know that's going to make people's heads explode in the comments, but I am persuaded that flat earth is a psyop. And it was an experiment. And people can rightly say, well, flat earth isn't new. It goes back to the 19th century or perhaps even the 18th century. Obviously, flat earth was the primary cosmological understanding of the universe for a long time. And that was perpetuated, by the way, by the Church of Rome until Galileo, basically. So,
but what's interesting is they use that as a proof point, which is not a proof point.
I'm not sure how flat earthers, why they would use the Roman Catholic Church perpetuating flat Earth as proof that flat Earth is true. I would think it would be the opposite of anything. But
it's like we also didn't wash our hands 1,000 years ago, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't. That doesn't disprove bacteria.
That's right. And people say, well, yeah, then what I hate is when people tell me, well, you don't believe in biblical cosmology.
You of all people.
And
that's hilarious.
And so what they've done is they have, as I said, they have taken this pet conspiracy theory that has become much more than just a passing interest or entertainment. I want to pull up some flat Earth videos and entertain this idea. That's totally fine. You can entertain anything you want. I mean, look at all the weird things I talk about. Entertain it all day long. That doesn't bother me. But what's happened, as I said, is these people have taken this ideology and it's morphed into like a new religion. And it has been integrated so deeply into people's theology that you cannot extract it anymore from their minds without stripping away their faith in Christ or their confidence in the Bible. And I heard, and with all due respect to him, the late Rob Skiba, Rob used to say something that I thought was very dangerous. He used to say, if flat Earth isn't true, then the Bible isn't true. If the Earth is not flat, then the Bible isn't true.
Wow.
And I really, really wish he wouldn't have said that. Of course, Rob passed away some years ago, tragically. I really wish he wouldn't have said that, but he did. And he said it multiple times. I heard him. And that's a very, very dangerous thing to say. But it became rooted in so many people's minds. If the Earth isn't flat, then I cannot trust the scriptures. Because in their minds, the Bible is a flat Earth book, as they like to say. And then they like to say, well, the book of Enoch is a flat Earth book also, which is a complete misconception for various reasons. But it's a misconception that the Bible is a flat Earth book as well. But that would take a very long time to unpack. But so I've watched this movement, this cult. I would define it as a cult. When you have something that's breaking churches apart and breaking up marriages and destroying families, that's a cult. Dude. Yeah. That's more than a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Most families don't break apart because the dad thinks we didn't land on the moon and the mom does. No. Right? Mm-mm. But when you see something destroying families, and I've seen two things, I name them, Hebrew roots and flat Earth, are wrecking balls, then that's a good indication that you're looking at something that's approximating a cult. And flat Earth is very cultish. Its adherents are exceedingly contentious, acrimonious, hostile. This thing is deeply implanted into their psyche. You cannot remove it easily. It's like it's like a mind virus, like
TDS.
Exactly.
Both are cults.
Exactly. That's a very good analogy. Yeah. It's like a mind virus.
So hostile.
And here's the thing. And I'm going to say this with a great deal of confidence. And again, people are going to hate me for it. Flat Earth is dead. There was an experiment that was conducted recently, and I really have a great deal of respect for the individuals who conducted this experiment. I think it was called the Final Experiment, and I wish I could remember the personalities who were involved, but I'll try and define what it was. The Final Experiment was a group of individuals, some of whom were flat earthers and some of whom were debunkers of flat Earth. And these were some of the most prominent figures in flat Earth and some of the most prominent debunkers of flat Earth. And there were individuals on both sides, so I have a high degree of respect for Jaronism, for example. Jaron was one of the guys from on the flat Earth side, with some others. And on the debunking side, these were not the really the really nasty flat Earth debunkers, because there's a lot of nasty flat Earth debunkers who are disrespectful and who denigrate flat Earthers. I don't do that. I don't denigrate flat Earthers. I won't do that.
Yeah.
But there are some, and most of them are secular, and they denigrate Christians in general and so forth. They weren't involved in this. It was the respectful debunkers. And there's one in particular, I wish I could remember his name and his YouTube channel. I can't. He's a photographer and I think an engineer. A lot of respect for him. I have respect for the guys on both sides. It was called The Final Experiment, and the idea was somebody was funding, believe it was a pastor, who was funding an expedition to Antarctica, and they just did this last year. They're going to go to Antarctica together. They were all bringing their own equipment, their own photography equipment, and they were going to together document the 24-hour sun in Antarctica, or the lack thereof, okay? If they filmed the 24-hour sun, the Earth isn't flat. If there is no 24-hour sun, the Earth is flat. That was the idea, because you can't, and I know the comments are going to get full of, people are going to be blasting the comments with the contention that 24-hour sun doesn't disprove flat Earth. Yes, it does. If you have a 24-hour sun in Antarctica, the flat Earth model that all flat earthers work with, the models that all of us have seen, where the sun and the moon are like rotating around the Earth, that model is busted forever, gone. That you can take that model and throw it in the garbage. Okay, that's what it does. 24-hour sun in Antarctica, that model is disproven once and for all.
Was it Robbie Davidson?
I'm not. You can pull up The Final Experiment, Flat Earth, and you'll see the individuals, the personalities who were involved. It was very well done, very scientific. I have a great deal of respect for the guys who participated. So they got on an airplane. Again, this pastor funded it. They got on the airplane. They went to Antarctica. They all set up their cameras individually. They all had their live streams and their cameras. And guess what they documented? A 24-hour sun in Antarctica.
Yep.
And one of them, Jaron, his channel's called Jaronism. I got a great deal of respect for Jaron because he's been one of the most honest flat earthers out there, and he's one of the least hostile. And Jaron quit flat Earth over this.
Yeah,
I think a lot
of people did.
He doesn't want to believe in a fantasy. Jaron, he's going to go with the data. And kudos to Jaron, and he quit flat Earth. I watched the video where he officially quit. And he quit mainly because his community was calling him a shill and a disinfo agent and accusing him of faking it, but also because he documented the 24-hour sun and he knows that the model's dead. Yeah. He quit. Yeah. Flat Earth.
Yeah, Robbie, I saw this the other day. Robbie Davison, he said, I've spent a decade of my life organizing 4 Flat Earth international conferences, a book, a YouTube channel with 150,000 subscribers. But the evidence from the final experiment in Antarctica has shifted my view. So he's recanting.
Good man.
On the flat Earth.
Good man.
He's showing signs.
And you know what? I'm not. And good for them. They had this hypothesis. They believed in it, but they weren't. It wasn't so deeply embedded into their psyche that they couldn't let it go if presented with evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
Good for them. And they should. I would never make fun of those guys. It's like, and to flat earthers, by the way. I was going to make a YouTube video, and I probably still will when I get back from Peru. To flat earthers out there listening to this, it's time to recover. It's time to repair your relationships that you've broken. It's time to apologize if you've been hostile, if you've been acrimonious to your family members and to your friends. It's time to mend the fences. Let that go and move on. And I'm not going to, and most of my colleagues, we're not going to denigrate you. We're not going to make fun of you. We're not going to say, I told you so. It's time for this to die. And I mean, again, we're going to break records here for the...
I'm ready for it.
Yeah, you might not have to make a YouTube video after this one.
I just didn't know how big of a deal it was, honestly. Yeah. I didn't know that we would have to get Tim Alberino out to Nashville to publicly
make a statement.
Debunk this.
And we were not planning on talking about this.
No,
but it needs to be said. It really needs to be said. And it's like a lot of things. I've believed in things in the past. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of ideas that I've jettisoned over the years when presented with new information. You want to build a model of reality that's accurate, or else you're living in a fantasy. I have no desire to live in a fantasy. I like to read fantasy. I like to watch fantasy, but I don't want to live in fantasy.
Nope.
So I want to build a model of the universe and comprehend the universe in the most accurate way possible. And so there's no reason to hold on to something any longer when it's been disproven.
Yeah, I agree. Do we have time to talk a little bit about Cydonia?
Yeah, I have as much time as you want.
So can you maybe break down a little bit of just loose context? I know that's going to be hard for you as a researcher to not just like a cursory overview. This actually fits in quite well with the flat Earth debunking, because you have other planets.
That's right. Yeah.
You have a system of astronomy that's working around us. But David Flynn, I'm going through your series right now. It's incredibly challenging material, but it's fascinating material, and it points to the divine council worldview.
That's
so
right.
It's maybe just
okay.
Let you
it's going to be very difficult to encapsulate this.
Yeah.
I'm doing this exclusively in my members community, so you're not going to find this on YouTube or anything like that.
Which is Alberino analysis.
The Alberinoanalysis.com.
The Alberino analysis. Okay.
And so we're going through Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars by David Flynn. Let me give you a little backstory. You started in episode 1, right?
Yeah.
So I lived in Peru for 10 years. And I when I was 18 years old, I dropped out of high school, moved to the Amazon, right, in Peru. And the way I like to describe this is I was living like a lion in the zoo. Okay, when I lived in Cleveland, Ohio, growing up in the suburbs of Cleveland, I grew up in Brook Park, Ohio. I was like a lion in a cage. I was in a zoo. I hated it. I felt like I was constrained. I wanted adventure. I wanted to experience the world and different cultures, and I just felt like I was in a zoo. I wanted to be free. And when I moved to Peru, I was free. It was like someone opened the cage, opened the door to my cage and let me out. And I was able to go and be a wild lion. And when I came back to the States, and I had to, there were various reasons that forced me back to come back to the States after living in Peru for 10 years, 7 of those years with my wife. 2 of my kids were born there. By necessity, I had to come back. I came back to Cleveland, Ohio, to where I grew up. And I lived with my brother for a while, and then we were renting a house in Cleveland, and I was just doing whatever I could to make ends meet. And that period of my life was the most difficult, because I felt like that wild lion that somebody had gone out on a safari and captured it and dragged it back into the zoo and threw it in the cage and shut the door.
Yeah.
So now I was like that lion who was born in the zoo, stuck in the cage, experienced freedom, but then was forcibly dragged back to the zoo. And it was so difficult for me. It was a very, very difficult period in my life. My wife can attest to that fact. I was aimless, purposeless, depressed. And my wife, previous to going to Peru, my wife and I, in the first months of our marriage, we were working with a couple named Ron and Ruth Shipley, wonderful couple. And Ron had a daycare, and it was in the projects on the west side of Cleveland. And my wife and I were working. I was driving a bus, and she was working in the daycare. And when we came back to Cleveland, she started working there again. So it was like we were going back to the life that I desperately tried to escape and succeeded. And it was just so hard for me. And one day, Ron and Ruth were over our house, and they were talking to my wife about, my wife was wanting to quit working at the daycare, and they were having a discussion about this. And I'm just sitting there as they're talking. I'm like not even listening to what's going on. In my head, I'm just thinking, get me out of here. I can't live like this. I need what's the next step? Like, what's the next thing for me? I need purpose. I need to chart a course out of here.
Mm-hmm.
This I can't live like this. I'm a wild lion. I can't do this. And we concluded the conversation, and Ron and Ruth are walking out the door. And as Ron's walking out my front door, he goes, "Oh, you got a package." And he bends down, he grabs this package, and he hands it to me. And it's like this cardboard package. And I forgot that I had ordered something. I didn't remember what it was. And he handed me this package, like this Amazon package. He put it into my hands. And as soon as that package hit my hands, I knew that what was inside was my future.
Wow.
That whatever's in this package is going to set the course of my life, was going to chart the course, exactly what I had been longing for, yearning for. And I forgot what it was. And I opened the package, and it was the book Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars by the late David Flynn. I think it was published in 2012, and I believe that's the year that Flynn died. Or it was published previous to that, and he died shortly thereafter in 2012. I'd never met David Flynn. I had been researching all kinds of things up until this point. That's why I bought the book. I was, reading material on ufology, abduction. I was very well versed at this point in the Nephilim stuff, but I had not yet read Cydonia, and I heard Tom Horn talking about it on a podcast. And the edition of Cydonia that I purchased, which is no longer available, was the I believe it's called the Collector's Edition. It had Temple at the Center of Time, which is a book also that was published by David Flynn, and Cydonia. And it had pictures of David Flynn in it. And it had pictures of his family and him as a kid. And he had and I was reading the introduction, and I was flipping through the pictures. And apparently, David Flynn was an identical twin. I'm an identical twin. David Flynn was an aficionado of Isaac Newton. I loved Isaac Newton. David Flynn lived in Montana. I think he lived in Billings, and then he lived in Helena. He went to school, I believe, in the University of Montana in Missoula, and I didn't know it yet, but I was about to live in Montana. And I was just flipping through this book, and I struggled to describe what I was feeling. It was like destiny. And I had no idea what the book was about, but I knew I was holding my destiny in my hands. And then I began to read the book, and I could not comprehend it.
It's up there,
It
dude.
is a difficult book. The first time I read
Especially the
Cydonia, it was like,
temple.
I got the broad strokes. I did. I got the broad strokes. But it was so esoteric, I couldn't comprehend it. And by the way, last time we mentioned Cydonia, last time we talked, we mentioned Cydonia, and all these people tried to get the book. Yes, it's very difficult to get. Defender Publishing, Tom Horn's outfit. Tom Horn died recently, by the way, but his outfit no longer sells the book. You can get it at stevequayle.com if you're interested in it. But I couldn't comprehend. I mean, as I said, I understood the broad strokes. And I read it and I put it down. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I got the gist of it. And then I moved to Montana. I moved to Montana to work with Steve Quayle, and we started a company called Gen 6 Productions, and I got involved in that. And then I decided, I'm going to read Cydonia again. And I remember I had this picture of Isaac Newton. I still do to this day in my little reading nook in my office. I got a reading chair and a bookshelf and a portrait of Isaac Newton. And I remember I was sitting in that reading chair reading Cydonia for the second time. And I get more of it now, but I still don't get all of it. But I get more of it than the first time. And by the time I get to the last chapters, I had one of the most powerful epiphanies of my life. One of the most. The most powerful epiphany of my life happened to me in the Amazon. But this was like number 2. This was like the second most powerful epiphany I've ever had. I've got the book Cydonia open on my lap. I'm reading the final chapters. And I was just sitting there like staring at the wall as my paradigm was being blasted to pieces. And for the first time, I could understand that I had allowed myself to be constricted within this box as a Christian in thinking about the universe in a very particular way, thinking about the kingdom of heaven and angels and all of this in a very, very particular way. Basically, the Western Christian traditional way of thinking about this stuff. And I realized that perspective was inadequate. And what Flynn was writing was it took a shotgun to my paradigm, blew holes in it, busted it into pieces. And that was the beginning of a lot of things that would follow in regard to my development and understanding of the universe and of the biblical narrative. And it was a major factor in me writing my book, Birthright. In fact, if you read my book, Birthright, which you can get on Amazon, if you read my book, Birthright, you'll see that I have an acknowledgments section at the front, and at the last person I acknowledge is David Flynn. And I write in that acknowledgement that I feel like I have been handed the baton, like in a relay race. Like I was running behind David Flynn, and he turned around and handed me the baton that he was carrying, and that I was supposed to continue to carry it. That's
Wow.
what I felt like.
Wow.
And indeed, Birthright, Cydonia was foundational to Birthright. And tragically, David Flynn died in 2012. I never had the opportunity to meet him. And not many people ever, I mean, his book it sold, I think, pretty well. But some people bought it, a lot of people bought it, but I don't think anybody really comprehended it. And that became apparent in the ensuing years when you really never heard his material coming out.
Yep.
And so fast forward to today. So Cydonia became foundational for me, inspirational to Birthright. I decided to create a members community last year around this time, and we have a book club feature in there. We'll read books, and we do these live streams, and we discuss them as you've seen. And we did some of Heiser's books in the beginning, great books. I did Graham Hancock's The Sign and the Seal, phenomenal book. And then I asked the community, what do you guys want to do next? And I did a poll, and most people wanted to do Cydonia. And I thought, oh, God, please, no.
Here we go.
I love Cydonia, but trying to explain this book is going to be very difficult. But they wanted to do it. So I was like, okay. And I did the first couple episodes of Cydonia in the book club. So it's a live stream, and we go through it together. And as I'm doing this, I decided to send an email to Mark Flynn,
His identical
twin brother. And I said, hey, Mark, I had his email, and we had corresponded a couple of times. I said, hey, Mark, I'm going through Cydonia. Would love for you to join. Would you like to join my community and jump on here with us? And he did. He joined my community, and he joined the book club discussions. And that I was so honored to have Mark join. And I thought, this is so great, because here I am talking about Cydonia. Now I've got David's twin brother, Mark, doing it with me.
That's so cool.
And Mark and I have since become really good friends. And then David Flynn's daughter, Tycee, joined the community. And now I have David Flynn's twin brother, Mark, and his daughter, Tycee, going through Cydonia. And so we've begun to work our way through Cydonia. We're almost done. That's the backstory. So Cydonia, what is it about? There's no way I could give you a one-sentence explanation of what Cydonia is about.
10 hours for you to do this.
Cydonia is a book that I believe David Flynn, he received this incredible, and I'm going to use this word that's very cliche, but he received this download, I believe, from God, providential to write this book. And it's about Mars. It's about Mars, but it's about a lot of other things besides Mars. It's about the pre-Adamic world. It's about an angelic civilization that inhabited the solar system. It's about the cataclysm, the cyclic cataclysm that's wrought ruination on planet Earth for thousands of years, periodically. So it's about the flood. It's about the Watchers, and it's about the mystery schools and the knowledge that the mystery schools have been perpetuating through the various branches of the mystery schools until today. It's about man's future endeavor to go to Mars. And guess what wasn't happening when he wrote this book? There was
Elon.
no SpaceX,
Nope.
or if there was, it wasn't really getting off the ground yet.
Yeah.
Figuratively and literally, and I'm not sure when the first rocket for SpaceX went up, but it wasn't. Let's put it this way: it wasn't what what it is today.
Right.
And this quest to go to Mars was not as prominent as it is today. But Flynn was writing about this, and he was showing in the book how the mystery schools, how the adepts of the mysteries, how one of their primary objectives is to put a man on Mars. Because when we go to Mars, we're going to discover, we're going to make an earth-shattering discovery when we go to the planet Mars. We are going to discover that Mars was previously inhabited by a superior pre-existent civilization, and that this was going to kick off a lot of the deception coming at the end of the age. And the book features primarily Cydonia, which is this area on Mars where you had the famous face on Mars that was popularized, I believe, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and then it was debunked.
He's for
Later
the
on.
podcast. He's got quotations around the debunk.
The DNM pyramid, that huge pyramidal structure on Mars, 5-sided pyramid, the face on Mars, and the other massive edifices on Cydonia, Mars.
Well, now they're saying there was water as well.
Right.
This is
And
a
of course,
couple weeks
Richard
ago.
Hoagland wrote about this. So Richard Hoagland published a book. I can't remember the name of the book. And then David Flynn, who published Cydonia, and ironically, Dr. Michael Heiser did various conferences together. And isn't that interesting?
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
you have, and this was back like in the late 90s, early 2000s. You had Hoagland, Flynn, and Heiser.
The Monuments of Mars is Hoagland's
The Monuments
book.
of Mars. Thank you. And how interesting is that? Because it's like, at first glance, how do those things fit together? But what you mentioned earlier, the divine council worldview, and I'm not saying that Heiser even would have even agreed with the Cydonia content. He was certainly intrigued by it because Mark told me some conversations that he had with Heiser and that David had with Michael Heiser. So privately, Heiser was very intrigued in Flynn's work, but publicly, he probably would have distanced himself from some of the ideas. But the divine council worldview and the content of Cydonia, they fit hand in glove. They really do. So that's generally speaking what the book covers. But it's remarkable because Flynn talks about the Zodiac and how the Zodiac is the timepiece for Cataclysm, for the Cyclic Cataclysm. I believe we discussed this last time.
Metzeroth.
The Mazzaroth to the Jews, the Zodiac to much of the rest of the world. And it enlightened me to the idea that encrypted in the scriptures, and I know we did discuss this last time, encrypted in the scriptures, you can find the Zodiac, references to the Zodiac. And I've been discovering many. And I've done some videos in my community I have a series called The Zodiac in the Bible. I've done 2 parts on it. So, and some of the stuff is not in Cydonia. After realizing this from Flynn's work, it just started occurring to me. Wait a minute. Or I'd be reading the Bible like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
This is a reference to the Suntelia, which is a 1,000-year period of cataclysmic transition marked on the Zodiac.
Aren't we in that right now?
We're in a Suntelia right now.
Does the Essene calendar sync up with...
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I know that my friend Josh Peck has done a lot of work on the Essene calendar. I'm not very familiar. I'm not very conversant with the Essene calendar. But the zodiacal system, that timepiece was given to mankind by God. I'm absolutely convinced of it. And I think it's totally evident. Enoch knew it.
Yep, he did.
Enoch knew it. His son, Methuselah, for example, we're not going to go deep down this rabbit hole because it would take literally, how many hours are we now in the Cydonia series? It would take dozens of hours to properly break this down. But Enoch, we all know that his son's name is Methuselah. And Enoch, he passed on the information that he received from the angels to Methuselah, who passed them to Lamech, who passed them to Noah. And Methuselah's name, and most people are familiar with this, Chuck Missler used to talk about this all the time. Methuselah's name means, one of the meanings, there's a couple of meanings for Methuselah. One of the meanings is his death shall bring. And of course, what shall his death bring? The flood of Noah. That's an indication that when Methuselah dies, the flood is going to ensue, because who received the revelation of the flood? Everyone says Noah. No. Enoch received the revelation of the flood. Noah was told to build the ark, but Enoch received the revelation of the flood and told his descendants that the flood was coming. When would the flood come? When his son Methuselah died. That was when the flood would come. And guess when the flood ensued? The year Methuselah died. How long did Methuselah live? I think it was 969 years. Well, that's the duration of a Suntelia, the window of time during which Cataclysm will ensue.
That's crazy, dude.
Okay, but it's more than that. Methuselah's name, the meaning of Methuselah's name, his death shall bring. That's only one meaning of Methuselah's name. The second meaning of Methuselah's name is the man of the dart, or the man of the arrow. And can't break this down, unfortunately, because we don't have time. But who's the man of the arrow? Who is the man of the arrow? Who's the man of the dart or arrow? Well, there's a complicated way to get to this conclusion, which, again, I'm not going to go through. But for the sake of brevity, the man of the arrow is Sagittarius. It's the sign of Sagittarius on the Zodiac. And Sagittarius is a centaur, which is very interesting, because the centaur has a very specific astrological meaning. And so Sagittarius is a centaur wielding a bow. He's drawing a bow and arrow, and the arrow is pointing at something very important. And this is called the sign of the Suntelia. And again, the Suntelia is... The sign of the Suntelia happens when you are within this window of time called the Suntelia, when Cataclysm is going to befall the earth. And the ancients knew this. It's encoded in the Bible, and it was known to the ancient Mesopotamians, it was known to the ancient Egyptians, it was known to the Greeks.
Because they wrote about this.
Well, they kept the time.
Well, the Egyptians had like writings as well, like if it's fire, here's how you deal with it. If it's water, if it's above the earth, below the earth.
They have the most ancient representation of the Zodiac, of the modern Zodiac, was discovered in the Temple of Hathor on the ceiling. It was painted on the ceiling. And that Zodiac reflects all of the signs, all of the astrological signs in the Zodiac that we have today. And in fact, it represents the sky, both in the southern and in the northern hemisphere. All the constellations and some of the planets, and it's exceedingly complex.
Yeah.
The Dendera Zodiac that was discovered on the ceiling, painted on the ceiling of the Temple of Hathor. And today it's in a museum in France. They put it on the ceiling in one of the exhibits I forget the name of the museum. It's very difficult to pronounce anyway, in France. So Methuselah's name, encoded in Methuselah's name, is Sagittarius, the dart man, the arrow man. And that has to do with the sign of the Suntelia. And if you're confused, well, go watch the Cydonia series. Yep. But so the idea is Cataclysm is cyclic. And why is it cyclic? What set the clock in motion? So you can envision the Zodiac, and the Zodiac, of course, has its 12 houses. And I don't want to repeat content we talked about last time, but the Zodiac has 12 houses, and each house has a symbol. The four cardinal directions of the Zodiac, in other words, the four primary points of the Zodiac, are Sagittarius, Scorpio, Leo, and Taurus. The man. Sagittarius, the man. Scorpio is a scorpion / eagle. It has a dual sign. Leo is a lion, and Taurus is a bull. The four faces of the cherubim. But so the Zodiac is a timepiece. The ancients used to refer to it as the mill. Like a mill is, most people don't know what a mill is anymore, but a mill would be this big stone. And the stone was a mechanism for grinding grain, and it would grind grain. And so the way that the way that it would grind grain is it would turn, and it would smash the grain between the mill and a stone or something like that, and usually pulled by oxen or by a donkey or something. And so the ancients viewed the zodiac as the great mill in the sky that was grinding out the ages. And again, this isn't pagan. This timepiece is in the Bible. This is one of this is the primary timepiece in the heavens is the zodiac, is the great mill. And it's what the zodiac tracks is what's called the precession, axial precession, the precession of the equinox. And that's based on the fact that the Earth is tilted on a 23.5 degree angle, and it wobbles. It has this very gradual, slow wobble. And it takes, nearly 26,000 years to complete one wobble. And that creates a scenario in which the position of the constellations change over time, because the perspective of the heavens from the Earth changes due to the wobble. Okay? Axial precession. So that's what the zodiac is depicting. It's keeping time. It's not about making predictions about your future. Are you a Leo? Are you a Sagittarius?
Yeah.
It's not about that. That has nothing to do with the zodiac. That's the kind of astrology that the Bible prohibits, trying to make predictions about your life and trying to using it as an augur or as a device to commune with the gods and figure out what your destiny is. But the timepiece of the zodiac itself, it has several. By the way, it also conveys the gospel of Christ.
Tell us.
Well, that's a long conversation, but the zodiac conveys the gospel of Christ.
Gosh,
and it corresponds
Alberino,
to the 12 houses of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel.
You're just teasing everyone at this
So
point.
the zodiac is not pagan, and it's not ancillary to prophecy and all this stuff. It is central as it pertains to time. And, the age of Christ, we talked about this last time, was the age of Pisces.
Yeah.
And it's very important. When you read in the Bible, in the New Testament, when they talk about the end of the age, they're talking about the end of an astrological age, 2,160 years, and the end of an aeon. That's the word that's used a lot, as an aeon. And the aeon is the end of the combination of three astrological ages. It has a duration of 6,480 years. It's three houses on the zodiac. And every time you complete an aeon, guess what happens?
Things
Cataclysm.
blow up.
Cataclysm. So guess what happens at the end of the age of Pisces? Well, read the book of Revelation. What do you see? Cataclysm. When the Lamb seated next to the Father on the throne is breaking the seals on the scroll, the earth is suffering cataclysm.
The pits opened up.
And why is cataclysm ensuing on earth? Because we're transitioning from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And this is the end of one aeon and the beginning of the next. It's cataclysm. It transitions with cataclysm. So why? Why does cataclysm happen like clockwork? Why were the ancients tracking it? Well, it's very simple. Why were the ancients tracking this? Because they want to know when they should prepare for cataclysm. I mean, nothing can be more important, right? When is civilization going to end? That's what the zodiac.
Question. Yeah.
That's what the zodiac tracks. So, one of the things. So, what set the clock in motion? Well, Flynn proposes, and I totally agree with him, that what set the mechanism into motion was the detonation of the planet Rahab. And
Here we go.
that planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter, that is today a debris field. And Rahab shows up in the Bible. That was, I think, the topic of our conversation last time.
Yep.
So people can refer to that conversation if they want to know more about Rahab. So Rahab is detonated. A planet exploded. The mountains melt like wax, by the way. The earth is observing the destruction of Rahab. The mountains literally melt like wax.
The earth is in terror, right? The earth is like looking, trembling.
Yeah, that's right. The earth is trembling, witnessing this devastation.
Yeah.
The angelic civilization inhabiting the other planets is annihilated. Why? Because this happens in the context of rebellion. That's why one of the chapters in my book is called Rebellion, War, and Ruin. First, you have this rebellion. It culminates in utter ruin, devastation. In the wake of this devastation, the earth is left to careen in its orbit, tohu vabohu, as the Bible describes it, desolate and empty. That's the beginning of our story. Then our story begins. So that's what Cydonia is about, and Rahab is destroyed. To finish my previous thought, Rahab is obliterated, and this destruction wreaks havoc in the solar system. And I believe, and so does Flynn, that the debris of Rahab rains down on the planets in its vicinity, including the Earth, and obviously pummels them. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the planets through a telescope, what do you see?
Bunch of craters,
just totally cratered.
Yeah,
and so I believe Flynn postulates this as well, that a large part of Rahab goes flying off into the solar system, but it's still caught in the gravitational force of the sun. And so every 6,480 years, a chunk of Rahab, which is now an asteroid, comes back into the neighborhood of the planets in our solar system. And it's this massive asteroid, and it's carrying behind it a debris field. Now, Flynn does talk about this, but I don't know how detailed. I don't recall how detailed he gets. But this is now my postulation as well. You got this chunk of Rahab, which is now an asteroid, and it's got this long debris field behind it, and it's making. I believe it's called. And I probably get this wrong every time I say it. Is it called an elliptical path around the sun, where it slingshots?
Yeah, the slingshot.
Slingshots back out into the darkness of space. It comes back around every 6,400 years. Slingshots back out, and when it's back in our neighborhood, the Earth passes through the debris field. And it's like clockwork, like all the other planets on their orbits around the sun. But because it's a debris field, you don't know exactly when you're going to collide with the debris or how big the debris is. I mean, you could be pummeled with huge chunks of debris, or small, or maybe barely get affected, right? So that's why the cataclysm varies. Exactly what the Egyptians told Solon of Athens in the Atlantean story, as recorded by Plato. So that is the mechanism, I believe, is the mechanism of cyclic cataclysm. We go through a debris field. Could be something else. That's my postulation. Could be something else. But there's something that's happening like clockwork. Again, that the Zodiac tracks that precipitates cataclysm and ruination on planet Earth. And that's what Cydonia is about.
Okay, so I have two quick questions, and then we'll start wrapping up. The AlberinoAnalysis.com is
my members
where
community.
you talk about all of this.
You can watch the Cydonia series, the book club series. Man, you got to join us on the live stream. Well, I didn't know you were in there watching these.
I just put them on in like the airport. I'm always
man, you got to jump in there with us.
All right.
We got the best chapters coming. You got to jump in there with us.
Okay.
A lot of people love your podcast, by the way, in the community.
No way.
They would be elated to find out you were in there.
Is the schedule in there already for me to go?
Yeah. Whenever I do a live stream, I post about it in the forum. So, we have like in my community, we have like our own private social media platform, like our own Facebook wall.
Yep.
And I always post it in there. And then there's a schedule on the side. Whenever I do a live stream, you can look at the schedule. You'll see the live stream. And then I send out the notification and the push notification in an email. So I'll text you next time.
Yeah, text me. I'd love to hop on live.
So you can join those live streams, but also you can also watch, if you're in my community, you can watch those films that I was talking about, and I think they're really good. You got to watch those.
I've got it queued up. I will tell people, like, Birthright is highly recommended for me as well. I read Birthright, and it's one of those books, you talked about paradigms, where when your paradigm changes, every rule you think you've had also changes. And it really, really made me like be more into Jesus than I was before, which is probably the best testament that you can have.
Then I've accomplished the mission. Yeah.
Highly recommend Birthright. And I think your analysis is just like you're doing a great job, but you can't get into what you're trying to teach in the time we have. There's no way to do it. But I do have a question about this topic. Is there something special about this end of the age where Jesus comes back? Because we don't see that in history.
Question. Yes, there is. He's going to see at the end of the Bible, Revelation. We read one of the most astounding pronouncements in all of the Bible. Now the habitation, the dwelling, the tabernacle of God is with men. Mm-hmm. See, right out of the gates, we have the wrong perception about what's going to happen. Most Christians think, "Oh, we're just pilgrims. We're just sojourning on the earth. We're sojourning on the earth, and our real home is heaven." Not according to the Bible. It's here. The habitation of God is coming here, and there's going to be a new heaven and new earth. There's some interesting things that can be said about that, and the sea will be no more. And everyone's like, well, I like the beach. Like, what the heck? Right? That, like, why don't we need more oceanside real estate, not less, right? Yeah. But that's not what it's talking about. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be any more ocean. It's celestial. The celestial, and really what this is pointing to is the Suntelia cycle of destruction is going to come to an end. Remember that let's go back to Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar has this vision of this statue cast in various metals. Yep. The head of the statue was gold. The chest and arms were silver. The midsection was bronze, and the legs were iron, and the feet were iron mixed with miry clay. And these represent the various empires that would rise in the earth. Yep. And the last one is the legs and feet. The feet are iron mixed with miry clay, which I have a lot to say about that in Birthright. And so you have Nebuchadnezzar's empire, the Babylonian Empire, because that's the one that is contemporary with Daniel. And Daniel tells him, these are the empires. The first one is yours, and the last one is the last empire that will arise on the earth. And then what happens? Then there's a stone hewn out of a mountain. And that stone is cast in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. It's cast at the statue. And it pulverizes the statue. It lands on the head and pulverizes it and grinds it into dust. And then a great mountain grows out of that stone. And what is that mountain? It is the empire of the Son of Man. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom and shall have no end. It's the kingdom of the Son of God, the Son of Man, Jesus of Nazareth. It's his kingdom. And it's going to be on earth. And there will be no end to that kingdom. And what has been obliterating the earth? Cataclysm. What brought the empire of the gods to an abrupt end in the antediluvian world? Cataclysm. What is the sign that cataclysm is coming? The sign, and this is dipping back into Cydonia, the sign that cataclysm is coming, the sign of the Suntelia, basically on an equinox or solstice, if you're in a Suntelia, you see the sign of the Suntelia. What that means that if you're standing in the area of the ancient Near East, the Mediterranean in general, you look to the horizon, and a 360 view, you will see the Milky Way sitting on the horizon. So the Milky Way is like the Milky Sea is encompassing the earth, and the earth appears to be rising out of this Milky Sea. The ancients referred to the Milky Way as the sea, the great sea in the sky. The Bible refers to the Milky Way as the sea. And there's a lot of allusions to the sea, which are actually allusions to the Milky Way. I mean, there's a lot of language pertaining to the sea, which are allusions to the Milky Way in the Bible. So the Milky Way is the great sea in the sky. And so I believe when it says that there will be no more sea, that the sea will be no more, I believe it means the sign of the Suntelia, the cataclysm will no longer occur, that he will break the cycle of cataclysm that has been destroying the earth. And that makes sense because he's going to have a kingdom that lasts forever. Yeah. So that cataclysmic cycle that destroys civilization is coming to an end. And Christ's kingdom will persist for all time, for eternity. So when it says there's no sea, Well, I read that it's apparent to me what it means. In fact, that sea shows up when you open your Bible in Genesis. What do you see? The sign of the Suntelia. The sign of the Suntelia. The sign of the Suntelia appears in Genesis when we read that he divided the water from the land. He said, "Let the dry land appear, and let the waters be gathered together in one place." What are we looking at? We're looking at one mountain of dry land. The water is receding. Remember, the earth is covered in water. It's receding, and you have like one island of dry land. So what do you have? You have a depiction of the sign of the Suntelia. You have the sea encompassing this singular outcrop of land. I believe that is symbolic of the sign of the Suntelia. It's telling us that the destruction of the earth that is apparent, that happened previous to the creation of mankind, occurred during the last Suntelia, during the previous Suntelia. And that when you open up the Bible, you're seeing a new aeon begin. And that new aeon begins with the creation of mankind. And so we're coming into the final aeon right now. We're transitioning into the final aeon when Christ will establish his kingdom and make an end of the cyclic cataclysm destruction of the earth.
It's amazing.
And again, that's all very complex, and there's all kinds of material that buttresses all of this in the Cydonia book and in our discussions. But that's what I think that means, that the sea will be no more. It's the Milky Sea. It's the cosmic sea. It's the sign of the Suntelia. It's an indication his kingdom will not be destroyed. Not by any man, not by any adversary, and not by any astronomical phenomenon.
Yeah. Amazing.
So,
here's my second question. You said the biggest paradigm epiphany you had was in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Do you have time to share what that biggest epiphany was?
Yeah, and I don't recall if we talked about it last time, but this was the primary. So let me put it in these terms so I don't confuse people. The primary inspirations for my book Birthright were Cydonia and the experience I had in the Amazon. There's a story I've never told, and I probably never will, of something very particular that happened to me in the Amazon. But previous to that event, I was out way up the River Masan. In fact, we were on a tributary called Sara, and we had to canoe up this thing. And it took all day long to get up this tributary, and sometimes canoeing, sometimes carrying the canoe. Me and Lucho. Lucho was a boy. He was Grover's nephew. And Lucho, maybe I got that wrong. I think he was Grover's nephew. Not a very important detail. But so I was up, Grover and his wife were in the canoe in front of us, dugout canoes, and me and Lucho were in the canoe in the back, and we were way up. We went way up into the jungle. And we were at this this spot that Grover liked. It was one of his hunting spots, and we made camp there. And Grover and his wife and Lucho went into the jungle to hunt. And I normally would go with them, but on this particular morning, I just wanted to hang out and read. I had some books with me and just spend some time by myself. And I also skinned a monkey that day.
What?
So,
whoa.
Yeah, he had a monkey they shot, and I skinned it because they wouldn't skin the monkeys. They would burn the hair off and then boil them. And I was like, no, I'm gonna skin this thing properly because I liked eating monkey, but I don't want to eat it with the skin. The skin is very thick, so I skinned it properly. And there's another unnecessary detail. But that morning, so I did that, and then I was down by the river, just sort of sitting there, and it was beautiful. It was really, really beautiful setting. The River Sada right there, and I was just ensconced in the jungle. And all of the fusion of life in the jungle, and just sort of mesmerized by it, just sitting there, relaxing. And just like I said, David Flynn got a download for Cydonia. I got a download for Birthright. And what's interesting is I hadn't read Cydonia yet. He hadn't written it yet. But I got the foundational elements of Birthright. that's when I got them, because I was sitting there, and I don't remember if I told this story last time I was on your podcast, but I was sitting there thinking about Adam and Eve, naturally. I mean, I'm in a jungle, and there's all this life around me, and I'm thinking about the Garden of Eden. Like, what? And I had this thought, what does it mean to be a human being? Like, what are we? Really, truly, what are we? And were Adam and Eve really just naked vegetable gardeners? Or are we missing something? Is there something much more profound here? And I just began to understand in that moment that Adam and Eve were that Adam was a son of God, and that he was in the family of God. He was in the divine family. He was a member of the family. And all this stuff related to our relationship to God, our relationship to our elder siblings, because I was recalling the parable of the prodigal son, which we definitely talked about last time. And all of that was coming to me as I was sitting there on the bank of the Sada, and it rocked me to my core. I mean, it rocked me. And I remember I was pacing back and forth. I got up and I started pacing and praying and just was just overwhelmed with this understanding, the beginning of an understanding of who we are, what it means to be us, what it means to be human beings, and why it is so important for us to understand that. That's really and especially as it pertains to the gospel of Christ, because Jesus is a kinsman redeemer. He became a man to redeem mankind, and what it means that he is now a human being. So that was the prelude, by the way, to something else. But that was certainly the foundation to Birthright, and I write that in the introduction to Birthright. So it was a transitional moment in my life. I was 19 years old, and that was the first thing that set me on my path. And then Cydonia charted the rest of the course for me.
Yeah. Beautiful. And you skinned and ate a monkey. Oh,
I ate many monkeys.
What did it taste like?
And other animals.
They like deer or something?
Well, it depends on the species. I mean, that day I was skinning what's called a white monkey, but
sounds pretty racist.
It's very good, yeah. And
racist Amazon jungle.
I've eaten various species. I mean, I've eaten the woolly monkeys. I've eaten what they call wapos in Peru. I've eaten all manner of animal. I've eaten sloths. I've eaten.
Are those good?
No. I've eaten anteaters. I've eaten toucans. I've eaten what we call sachavaca in the jungle in Peru, which is a tapir. All those like rodents, those big rodents that are in the Amazon. Those are the best. I've eaten wangana, which is like the jungle warthog. Snake. I've eaten all kind, like everything. I lived with a hunter.
Yeah, I don't get out enough, man.
I really didn't. I really didn't get to hunt much with him because I didn't have a gun. And the gun that he had was a shotgun, this old rickety shotgun that was literally held together with rope.
No way.
That was his shotgun. Yeah.
Wow.
It was held together with rope. And I went back to this family years ago, and I was sitting in their hut with them on the bank of the river, and all the huts are on stilts because the river rises, and we're up there sitting in the hut, and in walks Mike Tyson. Not the Mike Tyson. Not the Mike Tyson, but a Mike Tyson. And we used to call him Tyson. And Tyson came in and he sat down and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. And he was really distraught. And I was like, Tyson, what's wrong? And he goes, my dad is going to kill me. He's going to kill me. He's like, I'm dead. And I'm like, why? Because I lost his shotgun. And his dad had a different shotgun, equally, rickety and all held together by rope.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, how'd you lose your dad's shotgun? I mean, that's like losing your dad's wallet with all of his money and credit cards in it. That's what it was like out there. And he said, well, I was up the river hunting and I was stalking like a deer or something in the jungle. And all of a sudden, I hear this like growl, and I look over, and I realized I was being stalked by a jaguar.
Oh my god!
And it was this huge jaguar that, it was like in that position, prowling, and it was stalking him, and it was not far from him, and it leapt at him, and it went to claw him, but there was a tree between him and the jaguar, so it missed. And he took off. He started booking through the jungle, and the jaguar is pursuing him. And it's he's weaving between the trees. So it's not like the safari and like a lion chasing a zebra. It's a lot of trees in the way. So the jaguar is like trying to get to him, and he ended up jumping. He said, "I jumped into a colcha, which is like a pond or like a river." He jumped into the pond, and he said, "I don't know why I threw the shotgun." As I jumped, I threw the shotgun away from me into the water. I was like, "Why did you throw the shotgun in the water?" He's like, "I don't know." It's like, I was just running for my life. He's like, "I don't know what I was thinking, but I threw the shotgun in the water." And the jaguar was just sort of waiting for him on the shore for a minute and like determining if it wants to go in the water after him, and decided it wasn't worth the trouble, I guess. And it went away. And then he spent hours swimming around in this muck. And remember, there's
Stuff
anacondas in there,
Yeah.
and he's swimming around trying to find the shark. He couldn't find it, and so he had to tell his dad. And I don't know why I told you that story, but it just popped into my mind. But
and this was Mike Tyson.
That's the story of when Mike Tyson almost got eaten by a jaguar.
We'll put the table of contents.
And Mike Tyson, if you're out there listening to this, the real Mike Tyson. I'm not making up stories about you.
We'll do no.
This is the other Mike Tyson. This is the slightly less prestigious and famous Mike Tyson.
Yeah, the survivor. Man, thanks for coming out here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's always fun talking to you guys, really, and congratulations on your podcast. I mean, you guys are killing it.
We're just hanging on, man.
No, you're not just hanging on. You're exploding.
Yeah.
So you put out great content, and I really like coming in.
Let's go.
High praise,
and I want to see you guys in Bozeman.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be
okay.
so this is basically locked it down. It's
June,
happening.
Do you have tickets open for your
So
event?
I have a conference for the audience. I have a conference taking place in Bozeman, Montana in June from the 27th to the 28th. And why am I doing it in Bozeman, Montana in June? Because it is drop dead gorgeous.
Beautiful.
In Bozeman, Montana in June. I mean, it is absolutely gorgeous. And we're right by Yellowstone. It's the gateway to Yellowstone. It's just amazing out there. So I was thinking, like, why don't I do a conference here? I mean, this is like the best place to be at the end of June. So I did it. And you can get tickets at alberinoevents.com, alberinoevents.com. It's called NEFCON. Kind of a play on words.
Yeah, see what you did
2025, there. NEFCON 2025, and it's going to be phenomenal. It's myself, and I'm going to be showing, by the way, graphics and stuff for some of the stuff we were talking about, the Zodiac and all this. I'm going to deep dive, and I'm going to have some of your audience may be familiar with Mike Adams, the health ranger. He fills in for Alex Jones a lot. He's a good friend of mine. Mike does not do conferences, but he's doing my conference.
Nice.
My friend and partner Gary Haven. By the way, Gary's the founder of Curves. If you remember Curves, he's a multi-billionaire. He is one of the most interesting men on planet Earth. He's been all over Peru with me. We've had lots of adventures together. Then we're going to have David Paulides, who talks about the missing 411 phenomenon. Maybe some of your audience is familiar with that. Really riveting stuff. People go missing in the national parks. It has to do with UFOs. It has to do with Bigfoot. It's crazy. And some other people will be joining us as well. Keith from End Times Productions, big YouTube channel that a lot of people are familiar with, will be there. He's a good friend of mine. And it's just going to be great. It's going to be awesome. So if you want to go to the conference, alberinoevents.com. And it's about halfway sold out right now. I have a VIP event. We're going to Sage Wall, which is that potential megalithic wall in Montana. I'm not persuaded yet it's megalithic. I want it to be, and I'm hoping we find evidence that it's artificially constructed. I will be so excited, but we're going there, and that's sold out right now. But there may be some, people drop out. There may be some availability there, so you can keep checking if you want to go on that. But it's going to be awesome.
And there will be no jaguars, no anacondas.
No, there'll be grizzly bears.
Grizzly bears are fine.
I'll tell you what, I'd take a jaguar and anaconda any day over a grizzly bear.
Oh, they're the kings, dude.
Grizzly bears are one of the only animals on planet Earth that make me nervous.
For good reason.
Yeah. So, and we're close to Yellowstone.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, hiking, some of the best fishing in America is there.
Do you fly fish?
I don't fly fish. I do a lot better than the fly fishermen with the way I do it in the rivers.
What do you do?
Oh, I kill it. I'll show you. Come out there. We'll go fishing.
We're going to try to come out there.
Join me in Bozeman and I'll teach you the ways.
All right.
In the rivers over there in Bozeman. I go fishing in Paradise Valley. Paradise Valley is one of the most beautiful places in America. And it's the Yellowstone River is just awesome. It's awesome. Yeah, I love Montana. This is literally my favorite week in Montana. The last week of June.
Wow.
The best time to be there.
It's a big statement for someone who's been so many places. So.
I'd rather be there than anywhere on planet Earth in the spring and summer. I'd rather be in Montana.
Amazing. All right.
So,
well, maybe we'll meet some of you guys out there and we'll meet a grizzly bear. It's my dream.
Yeah, we can record some cool stuff out there and we'll have a good time.
All right. Thank you, man. See you guys.
Go.
What do you think, man?
So crazy.
You got to come.